The Case of the Phantom Recital, Chapter 1. A Curious Summons Miss Jane Marple sat by the window of her cozy cottage in St. Mary Mead, her knitting needles clicking rhythmically as she contemplated the letter that had arrived that morning. It was penned in the elegant, slightly tremulous hand of Mrs. Clara Wentworth, an old friend from her school days, whose passion for music had always outshone her modest upbringing. The letter invited Miss Marple to Wentworth Hall, a grand estate in the coastal village of Thornby-on-Sea, for a piano recital to raise funds for the local music school. Clara's words, though warm, carried an undercurrent of unease. "I fear there are troubling matters afoot among our performers. Dear Jane, and your sharp mind might see what others miss." Miss Marple's pale blue eyes twinkled with curiosity. She had not seen Clara in years, their friendship sustained through occasional letters filled with tales of music and village life. The prospect of a journey to the seaside, combined with the hint of a mystery, was irresistible. She set her knitting aside, her thoughts drifting to Thornby-on-Sea, a place she'd visited once as a young girl, recalling its windswept cliffs and the distant crash of waves, packing her modest suitcase with practical dresses and her favorite shawl. Miss Marple prepared for the trip. She informed her neighbor, Mrs. Price, to keep an eye on her garden and arranged for a taxi to the station. As the train chugged through the rolling hills of Devon, she gazed out at the mist-shrouded landscape, her mind already piecing together possibilities. Clara's letter had mentioned performers, suggesting a group of musicians, perhaps with rivalries or secrets. Miss Marple knew well how passion for art could stir both brilliance and mischief. Upon arriving at Thornby-on-Sea, she was met by a driver from Wentworth Hall, a taciturn man named Mr. Gibbs, who tipped his cap respectfully. The drive to the estate wound through narrow lanes lined with gnarled oaks, and as the hall came into view, Miss Marple noted its faded, grandeur ivy-clad stone walls, tall windows, and a roof that sagged slightly under the weight of time. Clara awaited her at the entrance, her silver hair swept into a bun, her face lighting up with genuine warmth. "Jane, you haven't changed a bit," Clara exclaimed, embracing her. "I'm so glad you've come. This recital means the world to our little school, but I fear it's stirring trouble I can't quite grasp." Miss Marple smiled, her unassuming demeanor belying the sharpness of her mind. "Trouble has a way of revealing itself, Clara. Now, tell me about these performers of yours." As they stepped into the hall's cavernous foyer, adorned with portraits of Wentworth ancestors, Clara's voice dropped to a whisper. "They're a talented lot, but there's tension accidents, whispers of sabotage. I need your eyes, Jane, to see what's hidden in the shadows." Miss Marple nodded, her curiosity fully piqued. She followed Clara to the drawing room, where tea was laid out, ready to meet the musicians whose talents and secrets would soon unfold like the notes of a complex sonata. Chapter 2. The musicians gathered. The drawing room of Wentworth Hall was a study in faded opulence, its high ceilings adorned with intricate plasterwork, though the gilding had dulled with age. A grand fireplace crackled softly, casting a warm glow over the velvet drapes and the polished mahogany furniture. Miss Marple settled into a high-backed chair, her hands folded neatly in her lap, as Clara began to introduce the key figures of the upcoming recital. The air was thick with the scent of beeswax polish, and the faint tang of sea salt carried through an open window, a reminder of Thornby-on-Sea's coastal proximity. Clara, her voice tinged with both pride and apprehension, gestured toward the group gathered near the tea table. "These are our performers, Jane and Sophia, my niece, who has been a godsend in organizing this event." Miss Marple's eyes, sharp despite her gentle smile, took in each person, noting their postures, expressions, and the subtle glances they exchanged. Up first was Julien Moreau, a French pianist whose flamboyant presence dominated the room. He was In his late 40s, with slicked-back dark hair streaked with silver, and a mustache that curled at the ends like a theatrical flourish. His silk cravat and tailored velvet jacket spoke of a man who craved attention, and his booming laugh filled the space as he recounted a tale of his Persian performances. Yet Miss Marple noticed his eyes restless, darting toward the others as if measuring their reactions. Monsieur Moreau is a legend, Clara said, though he's had a quieter few years. This recital is something of a comeback for him. Next was Eliza Crane, a young woman barely out of her teens, whose reserved demeanor contrasted sharply with Julian's exuberance. Eliza's auburn hair was pulled into a simple bun, and her plain gray dress seemed chosen to deflect notice. She sat, slightly apart, her hands clasped tightly, her green eyes fixed on the floor. Clara spoke warmly of her. Eliza's a prodigy, trained at the Royal Academy. Her performances have drawn crowds in London, but she's terribly shy. Miss Marple detected a faint tremor in Eliza's fingers and wondered if it stemmed from nerves or something deeper. Dr. Harold Vance, a music historian and amateur cellist, stood by the fireplace, polishing his spectacles with a handkerchief. He was a wiry man in his 60s, with thinning gray hair and a scholarly stoop, his tweed suit slightly rumpled. His voice, when he spoke, was precise, almost pedantic, as he commented on the acoustics of Wentworth Hall's music room. Dr. Vance is our expert on the historical pieces we'll perform, Clara explained. He's also cataloging my late husband's collection of manuscripts. Miss Marple noted the intensity in Dr. Vance's gaze when Clara mentioned the manuscripts, as if they held more than academic interest. Finally, there was Sophia Langley, Clara's niece, a vibrant woman in her early 30s with chestnut curls and a quick smile. She wore a modern emerald green dress that stood out against the room's muted tones, and her energy seemed to propel the conversation forward. Sophia flitted between guests, ensuring teacups were filled and introductions made. Sophia's poured her heart into this recital, Clara said, her tone affectionate but tinged with concern. The music school's struggling, and she's determined to save it. Miss Marple observed Sophia's forced cheerfulness, catching a fleeting frown when Julian interrupted her to boast about his repertoire as tea was served. Clara confided in Miss Marple, her voice low to avoid the other's ears. "Jane, I'm worried. There have been strange incidents, missing sheet music, a broken metronome, even a stage light that nearly fell during a rehearsal. I fear someone wants this recital to fail." She glanced at the group, her brow furrowed. "They're all so talented, but there's tension I can't place, jealousies, perhaps, or hidden motives." Miss Marple sipped her tea, her mind already at work. She recalled a similar gathering in St. Mary Mead, where a church fundraiser had unraveled due to petty rivalries. "People reveal themselves in small ways, Clara," she said softly. A glance, a hesitation, a word too carefully chosen. "I'll keep my eyes open." The conversation turned to the recital's program, with Julian insisting on performing a virtuosic Liszt piece, while Eliza quietly requested a Chopin nocturne. Dr. Vance suggested a rare Bach arrangement, his enthusiasm bordering on obsession, and Sophia mediated with a diplomat's skill. Miss Marple listened, her knitting needles clicking in her bag, unnoticed by the others. She noted Julian's subtle barb at Eliza's youth, Eliza's flinch at his words, Dr. Vance's distraction when the manuscripts were mentioned again, and Sophia's quick change of subject when Clara brought up the music school's finances. As the group dispersed to prepare for dinner, Miss Marple lingered, her gaze settling on a portrait above the fireplace, a stern Wentworth ancestor holding a violin. The painting's eyes seemed to watch the room, much like her own. She sensed that Wentworth Hall, with its creaking floors and hidden corners, held secrets as complex as the music it would soon host. The recital was more than a performance. It was a stage for human nature, and Miss Marple was ready to observe every note. Chapter 3. The Phantom's First Note Theft. Music Room of Wentworth Hall. On the evening before the recital was a sanctuary of sound and shadow, its ambience both intimate and imposing. The room's oak-paneled walls, polished to a worn sheen, were hung with portraits of long-forgotten musicians, their eyes seeming to follow the living with silent judgment. A crystal chandelier hung overhead, its prisms scattering candlelight across the room, casting fleeting glimmers on the ebony surface of the Steinway grand piano that dominated the space. Rows of velvet upholstered chairs arranged in neat arcs awaited the small audience of performers, Clara's guests, and a handful of Thurby-on-Sea's local dignitaries invited to witness the rehearsal. The air was heavy with the scent of rosin, old wood, and a faint salty tang from the sea. Carried through a half-open window that framed the darkening cliffs beyond Dot, Miss Jane Marple sat in a chair near the back, her shawl draped loosely over her shoulders, her knitting bag resting at her feet. Her hands were still, but her eyes were alert, taking in every detail of the scene with the quiet intensity of a conductor studying a score. The room buzzed with anticipation, a low murmur of voices mingling with the occasional clink of teacups. From a side table where refreshments were laid out, Clara Wentworth, resplendent in a deep blue gown that accentuated her silver hair, moved among the guests, her smile warm but tinged with an anxiety Miss Marple recognized from their earlier conversation. Sophia Langley, vibrant in a crimson dress, fussed with the sheet music on the piano, her movements quick and slightly jerky, betraying her nerves. Julian Morel, dressed in a burgundy tailcoat that seemed tailored for a grander stage, held court. Near the fireplace, his voice carrying over the chatter as he recounted a performance at the Sale Pleyel in Paris, his gestures were expansive, his mustache twitching with each flourish, but Miss Marple noted the way his eyes flicked toward the others as if gauging their reactions. Eliza Crane, by contrast, sat alone near the piano, her black dress stark against the room's opulence. Her auburn hair was pinned tightly, and her fingers traced the piano keys without pressing them, a silent rehearsal that spoke of both dedication and unease. Dr. Harold Vance stood by a glass display case in the corner, his notebook clutched tightly, his gaze fixed on Clara's prize manuscript, a rumored Beethoven sketch, its faded ink barely visible through the glass. His lips moved slightly, as if murmuring to himself, and Miss Marple wondered what secrets the manuscript held for him. Sophia stepped forward to open the rehearsal, her voice bright but trembling slightly, like a string plucked too tightly. "Good evening, everyone," she said, clasping her hands to steady them. "Tonight, we offer a preview of tomorrow's recital, a celebration of music to support our cherished Thornby-on-Sea Music School. We're honored to have such remarkable talent among us." She gestured toward Eliza, who rose with a small nod, her steps hesitant as she approached the piano bench. The room fell silent, the only sounds the faint creak of the floorboards under Eliza's feet and the distant, rhythmic crash of waves against the cliffs. Eliza settled at the piano, her posture rigid at first, then softening as she began Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major. The notes flowed like a gentle tide, each phrase imbued with a haunting melancholy that seemed to draw the listeners into her world. Miss Marple, though no connoisseur of music, felt the emotion in Eliza's playing, noting how the young woman's earlier shyness dissolved, her face illuminated by a quiet passion. The chandelier's light cast soft shadows across her features, and for a moment, the room was united in the spell of the music, the tensions of the day forgotten. Then, abruptly, the piano erupted in a discordant wail, a harsh metallic screech that tore through the nocturne like a knife. Eliza's hands froze, her body jerking back as a sharp twang followed, and a piano string snapped, its broken end whipping upward and missing her cheek by mere inches. She gasped, stumbling from the bench, her hands trembling as she clutched the piano's edge for support. The audience gasped, some rising from their seats, others whispering in alarm. The room, moments ago a haven of harmony, was now charged with confusion and fear. Clara rushed to Eliza's side, her face drained of color. "My dear, are you all right? What on earth happened?" she asked, her voice trembling. Eliza nodded, her eyes wide with shock, unable to speak. Julian strode forward, his expression a curious blend of concern and amusement, a faint smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. "A faulty string, surely," he declared, his voice loud and reassuring, as if addressing a theater audience. "These old instruments can be unpredictable, especially with such spirited playing." The barb was subtle, but Miss Marple caught it, and so did Eliza, whose cheeks flushed with a mix of embarrassment and anger. Dr. Vance, his notebook abandoned, on a chair, knelt by the piano, peering into its open lid with a scholar's curiosity. "Remarkable," he muttered, adjusting his spectacles. "A string snapping during a nocturne is highly unusual. The tension must have been tampered with." His words hung in the air, and Miss Marple noted the quick glance he cast toward Julian, as if testing a theory. Sophia, her hands twisting together, called for Mr. Gibbs, the hall's caretaker, to inspect the piano. "Please, everyone, stay. Calm," she urged, though her own voice betrayed her unease. Clara, still at Eliza's side, guided the young woman to a chair, murmuring reassurances, but her eyes darted toward the manuscript's display case, as if to confirm it remained. Untouched, Miss Marple, unnoticed in her corner, leaned forward, her gaze sweeping the room. She noted Sophia's anxious glance toward Julian, as if seeking his reaction, and Julian's smirk, which vanished as quickly as it had appeared, replaced by a mask of concern. Dr. Vance's intense scrutiny of the piano strings suggested more than academic interest, his fingers hovering as if tempted to investigate further. Eliza, now seated, clutched a handkerchief, her hands still trembling, her eyes darting toward Julian with a mix of fear and resentment. As Mr. Gibbs arrived, his weathered face set in a frown, Miss Marple rose quietly and approached the piano, pretending to adjust her shawl. Her eyes fell on the piano's lid, where a faint chalk mark caught her attention, a small, irregular smudge near the hinge, barely visible against the polished wood. It was not a random mark. It looked deliberate, perhaps a guide or a signal, left by someone with intent. She filed this observation away, her mind racing with possibilities. She recalled a St. Mary Mead incident where a sabotaged sewing machine had revealed a villager's spite, and she suspected this snapped string was no accident, but the opening note of a deeper discord. Mr. Gibbs examined the piano, his calloused hands probing the strings with care. "Looks like a loose tuning pin might have caused it, ma'am," he told Clara, his voice gruff but steady. "I'll have it fixed by morning, no trouble." Clara nodded, her relief palpable, though her eyes remained troubled. The rehearsal resumed with Julian taking the stage, his Liszt rhapsody a cascade of dramatic flourishes that seemed to mock the earlier disruption. Eliza, now among the audience, watched him with a guarded expression, her hands still clutching the handkerchief. Miss Marple settled back into her chair, her thoughts churning. The snapped string was no mere mechanical failure. Someone had tampered with the piano, she was certain. But why? To frighten Eliza, to sabotage the recital, or to create a distraction for another purpose? The chalk mark suggested premeditation, a careful hand at work. Julian's smirk hinted at a personal motive, perhaps tied to his rivalry with Eliza. Sophia's anxiety suggested she knew more than she let on, while Dr. Vance's curiosity about the piano strings raised questions about his priorities. Clara's Glance at the manuscript hinted at a deeper fear, perhaps. The recital was not the only thing at risk. As Julian's performance filled the room, Miss Marple's mind drew parallels to a village fete where a tampered cake had exposed hidden jealousies. This phantom note, as she privately dubbed it, was the first clue in a complex composition, one that wove together ambition, envy, and secrets. She glanced at the piano, the chalk mark now slightly smudged, as if someone had brushed against it in haste. Her knitting needles remained still, but her mind was alive, piecing together the melody of human nature that played beneath the music. The rehearsal ended with polite applause, but the atmosphere was strained, the guests dispersing, with whispered speculations about the incident. Miss Marple lingered, her eyes returning to the piano, its silent strings now a symbol of the mystery unfolding. She smiled faintly, her fingers brushing the edge of her shawl. Wentworth Hall, with its echoes of discord, was a stage for more than music, and Miss Marple was determined to uncover the truth behind this unsettling overture. Chapter 4. Whispers of Rival Riv. Morning after the rehearsal, Wentworth Hall was bathed in the soft, diffused luce of a cloudy coastal dawn. The sea beyond the cliffs was a restless murmur, its rhythm a counterpoint to the lingering unease that hung over the household. Miss Jane Marple, having risen early as was her habit, sat in the drawing room, a delicate porcelain teacup cradled in her hands. The room, though grand, felt quieter now, its opulence muted by the gray light filtering through the tall windows. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting flickering shadows on the portraits of Wentworth ancestors, whose stern gazes seemed to echo Miss Marple's own watchful scrutiny. Clara had arranged for a light breakfast to be served in the drawing room, allowing the performers and guests to gather informally before the day's preparations for the recital. Miss Marple, ever unobtrusive, chose a seat near the window where she could observe the group without drawing attention. Her knitting bag rested at her feet, a comforting presence, though her needles remained untouched, her focus entirely on the human drama unfolding before her. Eliza Crane entered first, her face pale and her auburn hair pulled back more tightly than the previous evening, as if to steel herself against further shocks. She hesitated at the threshold, her green eyes scanning the room, then moved to a corner near the tea table, where she poured herself a cup with hands that still bore a faint tremor. Miss Marple, sensing the young woman's vulnerability, rose and approached her, her smile gentle and disarming. "Good morning, Miss Crane," Miss Marple said softly, her voice carrying the warmth of a kindly aunt. "I trust you've managed some rest after last night's excitement." Eliza started slightly, then relaxed under Miss Marple's gaze, her shoulders easing. "Not much, I'm afraid, Miss Marple," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "That incident with the piano, it's shaken me more than I like to admit." She glanced toward the door as if expecting someone to interrupt, then leaned closer. "I'm beginning to think it wasn't an accident." Miss Marple nodded, her expression encouraging Eliza to continue. "These things can seem more sinister in the quiet of the night," she said, her tone neutral but inviting confidence. "Have you any reason to suspect someone might wish you harm?" Eliza hesitated, her fingers tightening around her teacup. "It's Julian," she said at last, her voice low and urgent. "Mr. Moreau, he's never liked me, not since I studied under him years ago. I was just a girl then, barely 14, but he was cruel, dismissive. He said I'd never amount to anything." Her eyes flashed with a mix of anger and hurt. "Now that my career's taken off while his has, well, faded, I think he resents me. Last night, when the string snapped, I saw him smirk. I'm sure he's behind it, trying to scare me off the stage." Miss Marple listened intently, her mind cataloging Eliza's words alongside her earlier observations of Julian's behavior. "That's a serious accusation, my dear," she said gently. "Have you any other evidence of his intentions?" Eliza reached into the pocket of her dress and produced a small, folded piece of paper, its edges worn as if handled repeatedly. "This," she said, handing it to Miss Marple. "I found it slipped under my door 2 days ago. It's not the... First there was another last week, but I threw it away, thinking it was a prank." Miss Marple unfolded the note carefully, her eyes scanning the scrawled words. "Leave the recital, or you'll regret it." The handwriting was uneven, deliberately disguised, and the paper was plain, offering no obvious clues. She folded it again, tucking it into her sleeve for later examination. "This is troubling indeed," she said, her tone calm but grave. "Have you shown it to Mrs. Wentworth or Miss Langley?" Eliza shook her head. "I didn't want to worry Clara and Sophia's. So busy with the recital. Besides, I wasn't sure anyone would believe me. Julian's so charming, so convincing. People adore him." Her voice cracked and she looked away, her eyes glistening. Miss Marple placed a reassuring hand on Eliza's arm. "You were right to tell me, my dear. Rest assured, I'll keep my eyes open. People often reveal more than they intend, especially when they think no one's watching." She smiled, her expression a blend of kindness and quiet determination, and Eliza managed a small, grateful nod before returning to her tea. As Eliza moved away, Miss Marple resumed her seat, her mind turning over the note and Eliza's story. She recalled a similar incident in St. Mary Mead, where anonymous letters had sown discord at a village fete, only to be traced to a jealous rival. Julian's smirk during the piano incident and his theatrical charm suggested a man capable of such pettiness, but Miss Marple knew better than to leap to conclusions. Envy was a powerful motive, but it was not the only one at play in Wentworth Hall. The room began to fill as the others arrived. Julian entered with his usual flair, his silk scarf fluttering as he greeted Clara with a gallant bow. His eyes flicked toward Eliza, and Miss Marple caught a fleeting glint of satisfaction, quickly masked by a charming smile. Sophia followed, her emerald dress bright against the room's muted tones. Her smile strained as she exchanged pleasantries with the guests. Dr. Harold Vance was last, his tweed suit as rumpled as ever, his notebook clutched like a talisman. He made straight for the fireplace where Clara stood, and Miss Marple noted the intensity in his posture as they began to speak. Seizing the opportunity, Miss Marple sipped her tea and watched as Clara and Dr. Vance moved to a quieter corner of the room, near a glass-fronted cabinet that housed several of Clara's musical treasures, including the rumored Beethoven manuscript. The manuscript, a single sheet of yellowed paper covered in faded ink, was the centerpiece of the collection, its presence a point of pride for Clara, and evidently a fascination for Dr. Vance. Miss Marple adjusted her position slightly, her view unobstructed, and strained to catch their conversation over the low hum of the room. "Mrs. Wentworth," Dr. Vance was saying, his voice low but fervent, "I must reiterate the significance of that manuscript. If it is indeed Beethoven's, it could redefine our understanding of his later works. Have you considered having it authenticated by the British Museum? I could arrange it, you know." Clara's smile was polite but guarded. "You're very kind, Dr. Vance, but my late husband was adamant that it remain in the family. It's a piece of our history as much as the hall itself. Besides, I'm not sure I trust those London scholars not to claim it for themselves." Her tone was light, but Miss Marple detected a note of unease, as if Clara sensed the weight of Dr. Vance's interest. Dr. Vance's eyes gleamed behind his spectacles, and he leaned closer, his voice dropping further. "I understand your caution, but such a treasure deserves to be shared with the world. Its value, scholarly, not merely monetary, is incalculable." He paused, then added, almost casually, "Have you noticed anyone lingering near the cabinet?" With all these incidents, one can't be too careful. Clara's brow furrowed, and she glanced toward the cabinet, her fingers tightening around her teacup. No, not particular, but I'll ask Sophia to keep an eye on it. Thank you for your concern, Dr. Vance. She excused herself, moving to greet another guest, but Miss Marple noted the way her eyes lingered on the manuscript, as if reassessing. Its safety. Dr. Vance remained by the cabinet, his gaze fixed on the manuscript, his fingers tracing the edge of his notebook. Miss Marple watched him closely, her mind drawing parallels to a St. Mary Mead antiquarian who had once coveted a rare book, his obsession leading to deceit. Dr. Vance's scholarly zeal was evident, but was it purely academic, or did it mask a desire to possess the manuscript for himself? His question about lingerers suggested he was either genuinely concerned or planting the idea of theft to deflect suspicion. As the breakfast continued, Miss Marple observed the interactions among the group. Julian, now seated near Sophia, was regaling her with a story of a Vienna concert, his laughter loud but his eyes cold when they met Eliza's. Sophia nodded politely, but her attention seemed elsewhere, her fingers fidgeting with a pearl brooch. Eliza, isolated in her corner, avoided looking at Julian, her posture rigid. Miss Marple noted the undercurrents of tension, Julian's veiled hostility, Eliza's fear, Dr. Vance's fixation, and Sophia's distraction, and felt the threads of the mystery beginning to weave together. She recalled the chalk mark on the piano, the anonymous note, and the snapped string, each a note in a discordant melody. The recital was a stage for more than music. It was a battleground of ambition, resentment, and hidden desires. Miss Marple sipped her tea, her eyes narrowing slightly as she watched Dr. Vance linger by the manuscript cabinet, his fingers brushing the glass as if caressing a lover. She thought of a village gossip who had once spread rumors to conceal her own misdeeds, and she wondered if someone in this room was playing a similar game, using the incidents to mask a greater crime. As the group began to disperse, Miss Marple tucked Eliza's note deeper into her sleeve, her mind already planning her next steps. She would need to speak with Sophia, whose anxiety suggested she knew more than she let on, and perhaps Mr. Gibbs, whose inspection of the piano might reveal more than he'd let slip. For now, she rose, her shawl draped neatly over her shoulders, and moved toward the door, her unassuming presence belying the sharpness of her mind. The whispers of rivalry were growing louder, and Miss Marple was determined to hear every word. Chapter 5. A nighttime disturbance net after the unsettling rehearsal. Wentworth Hall was cloaked in a stillness that felt almost oppressive, broken only by the distant crash of waves against the cliffs of Thornby-on-Sea. The moon, obscured by heavy clouds, cast no light through the tall windows, leaving the corridors and rooms in a deep, shadowy gloom. Miss Jane Marple, who had retired to her guest room with a cup of chamomile tea and her knitting, found sleep elusive, her mind buzzing with the day's observations, the chalk mark on the piano, Eliza's anonymous note, Julian's smirk, and Dr. Vance's fixation on the manuscript. She sat by the window, her shawl draped over her shoulders, listening to the creaks of the old house as it settled, each sound a reminder of its age and secrets. Shortly after midnight, a sharp resounding crash shattered the silence, echoing through the hall like a thunderclap. Miss Marple's knitting needles paused mid-stitch, her head tilting as she pinpointed the sound's origin, the music room. She was certain. She set her knitting aside, slipped on her sensible shoes, and donned a dressing gown, her movements swift but calm. As she stepped into the corridor, she heard hurried footsteps and muffled voices, indicating others had been roused by the noise. Clutching her small flashlight, a practical item she always carried on such trips, she made her way toward the music room, her heart steady despite the eerie atmosphere. The music room, When she reached it was a scene of chaos illuminated by the flickering light of a single candelabrum, hastily lit by Clara, who stood in the doorway, her face ashen. The grand piano stood untouched, but the room around it was in disarray. Sheet music, carefully arranged for the recital, lay scattered across the floor, some pages torn or crumpled as if flung in haste. A small table near the window had been overturned, its contents a crystal decanter and several glasses shattered on the oak floor, the source of the crash. The window itself was ajar, its heavy curtains swaying slightly in the chilly night breeze, and a faint dampness suggested the sea air had crept in. Clara, in a silk dressing gown, her silver hair loose and disheveled, clutched the candelabrum with trembling hands. "Jane, thank heavens you're here," she whispered, her voice tight with fear. "What's happened?" "This is no accident. Someone's been in here." Her eyes darted to the glass display case in the corner, and she let out a stifled cry. "The manuscript, it's gone." Miss Marple followed her gaze, her flashlight beam cutting through the dimness to reveal the cabinet, its glass door intact but the lock visibly forced, a small scratch marking the metal. The velvet-lined interior where the rumored Beethoven manuscript had rested was empty, the absence of the yellowed page as stark as a missing note in a melody. She stepped closer, careful not to disturb the scattered papers, and noted the precision of the lock's damage. Someone with skill or a specific tool had opened it. Not a clumsy thief dot by now. The other guests had gathered, their faces a mix of shock and suspicion in the candlelight. Julian Moreau, his burgundy dressing gown hastily tied, surveyed the scene with a theatrical gasp, though Miss Marple caught a flicker of calculation in his eyes. "Mon Dieu, a burglary!" he exclaimed, his voice carrying a hint of drama that seemed rehearsed in such a house under our very noses. Eliza Crane, wrapped in a woolen shawl, stood near the doorway, her face pale and her hands clutching the fabric tightly. Her eyes, wide with fear, darted from the empty cabinet to Julian, and Miss Marple noted the way she shrank back when he spoke, as if his presence intensified her unease. Dr. Harold Vance, his tweed pajamas as rumpled as his daytime attire, pushed his spectacles up his nose and knelt by the cabinet, his fingers hovering over the scratched lock. "This is outrageous," he muttered, his voice quivering with indignation, or perhaps something else. "That manuscript was priceless. We must search the grounds at once." Sophia Langley arrived last, her chestnut curls loose and her emerald nightdress hastily covered by a shawl. She froze at the side of the room, her hand flying to her mouth. "The manuscript? Oh, Clara, how could this happen?" Her voice was strained, and Miss Marple caught a fleeting glance she cast toward the open window, as if expecting to see someone fleeing into the night. It was then that Miss Marple's nostrils detected a faint, familiar scent, lavender, delicate, but distinct, the same perfume she had noticed on Sophia during the rehearsal. It lingered in the air near the window, mingling with the sea's saltiness, and Miss Marple filed this observation away, her mind already weaving connections. Clara, regaining some composure, turned to Sophia. "Fetch Mr. Gibbs quickly and send for Inspector Lyle. We need the police." Sophia nodded, her movements jerky, and hurried from the room. Clara then addressed the group, her voice firm despite her distress. "No one is to touch anything until the inspector arrives. Jane, you've seen things like this before. Please help us make sense of this." "Curious," Miss Marple murmured to herself, her beam lingering on the smudge. She recalled a theft in St. Mary Mead where a broken window had been staged to suggest an outsider's crime when the culprit was within the household. The open window here, combined with the lavender scent, pointed to someone familiar with the hall's layout, someone who knew the manuscript's value and the cabinet's lock. Julian, pacing near the piano, broke the silence. "This is clearly..." The work of a professional thief, he declared, his hands gesturing expansively. They must have come through the window, taken the manuscript, and fled before we could catch them. His tone was authoritative, but Miss Marple noted the way his eyes avoided the cabinet, as if he were distancing himself from it. Dr. Vance, still by the cabinet, shook his head. A professional would have taken more than one item, he countered, his voice sharp. The other manuscripts are valuable too, yet only the Beethoven was taken. This was targeted. His fingers twitched, as if itching to examine the lock further, and Miss Marple wondered if his indignation masked a deeper involvement. Eliza, speaking for the first time, her voice barely audible, said, "It's all connected. Isn't it? The piano, the notes I received, and now this. Someone wants to ruin everything." Her eyes flicked to Julian, then away, and Miss Marple noted the accusation in her gaze, though she held back from voicing it outright. Clara, her composure fraying, clutched Miss Marple's arm. "Jane, what do you make of it? Is it one of us? Or an outsider? I can't bear to think someone in this house would do such a thing." Miss Marple patted her friend's hand, her voice soothing. "It's too early to say, Clara, but every crime leaves a trace, like a false note in a melody. We'll find it, in time." She glanced at the group, her eyes lingering on Sophia, who had returned with Mr. Gibbs, her face flushed from her. "Haste." The lavender scent was stronger now, emanating faintly from Sophia's shawl, and Miss Marple's mind turned over the possibility that Sophia's anxiety hid more than organizational stress. Mr. Gibbs, his weathered face grim, examined the window and the cabinet, muttering about the lock's precision. "Not a common thief's work," he said gruffly. "Someone knew what they were after." He secured the window, his movements deliberate, and Miss Marple noted his familiarity with the room, wondering if he had seen anything unusual in his nightly rounds. As the group waited for Inspector Lyle, Miss Marple continued her quiet observations. She picked up a torn sheet of music, noting a faint pencil mark in the margin, a small, curved line, not unlike the chalk mark on the piano. It was subtle, easily overlooked, but to Miss Marple, it was another thread in the tapestry of the crime. She recalled a village incident where a marked book had led to a thief's undoing, and she tucked the paper into her sleeve alongside Eliza's note. Inspector Lyle arrived, a stout man with a no-nonsense demeanor, his notebook already open. He listened to Clara's account, examined the cabinet, and questioned each guest briefly, though the late hour and the chaos limited his inquiries. "We'll search the grounds at first light," he declared, his voice firm. "For now, everyone return to your rooms. I'll post a constable outside to secure the scene." As the group dispersed, Miss Marple lingered, her flashlight beams sweeping the room one last time. The lavender scent, the muddy smudge, the marked music, and the forced lock formed a pattern, one that pointed to someone within the hall, or someone with intimate knowledge of its secrets. She thought of Sophia's anxious glances, Julian's calculated drama, Dr. Vance's fixation, and Eliza's fear, each a note in a discordant symphony. The manuscript's theft was no isolated act. It was part of a larger composition, and Miss Marple was determined to uncover its composer. She returned to her room, her mind alert despite the hour, and sat by the window, her knitting untouched. The sea's rhythm was a reminder of time's relentless march, and she knew the truth would surface, as it always did, in the small, overlooked details. For now, she closed her eyes, letting the pieces of the puzzle settle, confident that the next day would bring her closer to the heart of the mystery. Chapter 6. The Historian's Taliff. Morning after the theft of the Beethoven manuscript, Wentworth Hall was shrouded in a heavy mist that rolled in from the sea, cloaking the estate in a veil of gray that matched the mood within. The grand dining room, where a breakfast was served, felt less opulent under the dim light. Its long mahogany table set with silver and porcelain that seemed to mock the tension among the guests. Miss Jane Marple, seated near Clara at the head of the table, sipped her tea with her usual composure, her pale blue eyes scanning the room with a quiet intensity. Her knitting bag rested by her chair, a silent companion, but her mind was far. From idle, piecing together the threads of the previous night's disturbance, the lavender scent, the muddy smudge, the marked music, and the fourth lock. Inspector Lyle had returned at dawn, accompanied by a young constable, and was now in the music room, examining the scene with methodical precision. Clara, her face drawn from a sleepless night, had insisted the guests carry on with breakfast. Though the atmosphere was strained, conversation limited to polite murmurs and the clink of cutlery. Julian Moreau, his flamboyance subdued, picked at his eggs, his eyes darting toward the door as if expecting news. Eliza Crane, pale and withdrawn, sat across from him, her hands folded tightly in her lap, her gaze fixed on her untouched plate. Sophia Langley, her chestnut curls pinned haphazardly, moved restlessly, refilling teacups with a forced smile that did little to mask her anxiety. Dr. Harold Vance, however, was the most animated, his tweed suit as rumpled as ever, his spectacles slipping down his nose as he spoke fervently to Clara about the manuscripts lost. Miss Marple, sensing an opportunity to probe deeper, excused herself from the table under the pretense of stretching her legs and made her way to the library, where she knew Dr. Vance often retreated to work on his cataloging. The library, a high-ceilinged room lined with leather-bound volumes and heavy oak shelves, smelled of old paper and polish, its tall windows offering a view of the mist-shrouded cliffs. Dr. Vance was there, as expected, seated at a desk cluttered with notes and manuscripts, his notebook open to a page filled with cramped handwriting. He looked up as Miss Marple entered, his expression a mix of surprise and irritation, quickly masked by a polite smile. "Good morning, Dr. Vance," Miss Marple said, her voice gentle and unassuming, as if she had merely wandered in by chance. "I hope I'm not disturbing you. I thought a quiet moment in the library might soothe my nerves after last night's excitement." Dr. Vance adjusted his spectacles, his fingers twitching slightly. "Not at all, Miss Marple," he replied, though his tone suggested he'd rather be alone. "It's a dreadful business, the theft. I'm trying to make sense of it myself." He gestured to his notebook, as if to emphasize his scholarly diligence. Miss Marple settled into a nearby armchair, her shawl draped neatly over her shoulders, her hands folded in her lap. "It is dreadful," she agreed, her eyes softening with sympathy. "That manuscript was a treasure, wasn't it? You seemed so taken with it yesterday. I imagine its loss must be particularly painful for a scholar like yourself." Dr. Vance's eyes lit up, his reserve melting under the chance to discuss his passion. "Painful is an understatement, Miss Marple," he said, leaning forward, his voice fervent. "That manuscript, if it is indeed Beethoven's, could rewrite music history. Its annotations, the structure of the sketches, suggest a transitional work, perhaps a precursor to his late quartets. To lose it to a thief is not just a crime against Mrs. Wentworth, but against the world of music itself." His hands gestured animatedly, knocking a pencil to the floor, which he retrieved with a flustered motion. Miss Marple nodded, her expression attentive but her mind sharp, noting the intensity in his words. "You've studied it closely, then?" she said, her tone conversational. "Did you notice anything unusual about it, or perhaps about the cabinet, before it was taken? Sometimes the smallest detail can be significant." Dr. Vance hesitated, his fingers tightening around his notebook. "Nothing unusual, no," he said, a touch too quickly. "The cabinet was secure, the lock intact, as far as I could tell. I checked it myself during the rehearsal, purely out of professional interest, you understand." He paused and added, I did warn Mrs. Wentworth to be cautious. With such a valuable item, one can't be too careful, especially with all these incidents. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed slightly, though her smile remained gentle. Indeed you did, she said, recalling his conversation with Clara. It's curious, though, that only the Beethoven manuscript was taken. A thief might have taken others, as you said last night. It suggests someone knew its precise value, don't you think? Dr. Vance's face flushed, and he adjusted his spectacles again, a nervous habit Miss Marple had come to recognize. Quite possibly, he said, his voice steadier now. But it could also be a matter of opportunity. The Beethoven was the most prominent, displayed so openly. A thief might have targeted it for that reason alone. He leaned back, as if to distance himself from the implication, and added, I have offered to assist Inspector Lyle, you know. I've detailed my notes on the manuscript's appearance, its condition, even its paper type. If it surfaces in the antiquarian market, we'll know it. Miss Marple tilted her head, her expression one of mild curiosity. How very helpful. She said, Your knowledge must be invaluable to the inspector. Have you any theories about who might have taken it? You've been so observant, cataloging the collection. Perhaps you've noticed someone lingering near the cabinet, as you suggested. To Clara? Dr. Vance's eyes flickered, and for a moment, Miss Marple thought she saw a flash of unease. No one specific, he said, his tone careful. Though I did see Mr. Moreau near the music room yesterday afternoon, adjusting the piano, he said. And Miss Crane was there often, practicing, of course. But I'm not one to cast aspersions without evidence. He forced a smile, his fingers tapping the notebook. I leave that to the professionals, like Inspector Lyle. Miss Marple nodded, her mind cataloging his words. His eagerness to assist the police, combined with his quick deflection of suspicion onto Julian and Eliza, was telling. She recalled a case in St. Mary Mead where a local historian, obsessed with a rare coin, had staged a theft to rescue it for posterity, only to be betrayed by his own meticulous notes. Dr. Vance's passion for the manuscript was undeniable, but was it scholarly zeal or something more possessive? His mention of checking the cabinet during the rehearsal raised questions. Had he been ensuring its security or studying its lock? Thank you, Dr. Vance, Miss Marple said, rising from her chair, her voice warm but her eyes sharp. You've given me much to think about. I do hope the inspector finds the manuscript soon, for Clara's sake and for the sake of music. History. She smiled, her unassuming demeanor belying the calculations in her mind, and left the library, her steps slow but purposeful dot as she returned to the dining room. Miss Marple reflected on Dr. Vance's words and behavior. His fervor for the manuscript, his nervous habits, and his readiness to point fingers at others suggested a man with something to hide. The lavender scent from the music room, linked to Sophia, complicated the picture. Could Dr. Vance and Sophia be connected, or was the scent a deliberate misdirection? She thought of the muddy smudge on the window frame, the marked music, and Eliza's anonymous note, each a piece of a puzzle that was beginning to take shape. Back in the dining room, Inspector Lyle had joined the group, his notebook filled with fresh observations. He was questioning Julian, whose theatrical indignation was in full display, and Miss Marple noted Clara's strained expression as she listened. Sophia, pouring tea, avoided Miss Marple's gaze, her hands trembling slightly, while Eliza sat silently, her eyes fixed on Julian with a mix of fear and defiance. Dr. Vance entered shortly after, his notebook still in hand, and offered to show. The inspector, his detailed description of the manuscript, his voice eager, almost insistent. Miss Marple resumed her seat, her tea now cold, but her mind alight. She recalled a village scandal where a collector's obsession had led to theft. Masked by a veneer of helpfulness, Dr. Vance's tale, like the manuscripts he studied, was rich with detail, but perhaps not entirely truthful. The theft, the sabotage, and the rivalries were all notes in a complex composition, and Miss Marple was determined to uncover the melody's true composer. For now, she sipped her tea, her eyes drifting to the mist outside, knowing that the truth, like the sea, would reveal itself in time. Chapter 7. The Prodigy's Secret. Afternoon following the manuscript's theft was marked by a restless energy at Wentworth Hall. As the mist began to lift, revealing glimpses of the rugged cliffs and churning sea beyond, the recital now, just a day away, loomed over the household, its importance magnified by the recent chaos. Miss Jane Marple, ever attuned to the undercurrents of human behavior, sought out Eliza Crane, whose quiet demeanor and trembling hands hinted at a story, yet untold. She found the young pianist in the conservatory, a glass-walled room filled with potted ferns and the faint scent of damp earth, where Eliza sat at a small upright piano, her fingers hovering over the keys without playing. The conservatory, with its view of the misty gardens, offered a quieter refuge from the bustle of the hall, and Miss Marple approached with her characteristic gentleness, her shawl draped loosely over her shoulders. "Miss Crane," she said softly, settling into a wicker chair nearby. "I hope I'm not interrupting. I thought you might appreciate a moment of company after all that's happened." Eliza looked up, her green eyes wide with a mix of surprise and relief, her auburn hair slipping slightly from its tight bun. "Oh, Miss Marple," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I'm glad it's you. I haven't been able to focus, not with the piano incident and now the manuscript. It's all too much." Her hands, resting on the piano, trembled visibly, and Miss Marple noted the way her fingers clenched, as if holding back more than nerves. "There's no shame in feeling shaken, my dear," Miss Marple said, her tone warm and reassuring, like a kindly aunt soothing a troubled child. "You've had quite a fright, and this business with the manuscript has unsettled us all. But sometimes sharing a burden can lighten it. I found you to be a thoughtful young woman. Perhaps there's something on your mind you'd like to confide." Eliza hesitated, her gaze dropping to the piano keys, her fingers tracing their edges as if seeking comfort in their familiarity. She took a deep breath, then met Miss Marple's eyes, her own filled with a mix of fear and resolve. "It's Julian," she began, her voice low and unsteady. "Mr. Moreau, I told you before about how he was my teacher years ago, when I was just a girl. He was so cruel, Miss Marple. He'd mock my playing, tell me I lacked passion, but I'd never rise above mediocrity. I was only 14, and his words, they stayed with me like a shadow." Miss Marple nodded, her expression attentive but encouraging, recalling Eliza's earlier accusations. "That must have been terribly hard," she said gently, "to face such criticism at so young an age, and from someone you admired. But you've proven him wrong, haven't you? Your talent has shone brightly, from what Clara tells me." Eliza's lips trembled, and she shook her head, her eyes glistening. "That's just it," she said, her voice breaking. "I thought I'd moved past it, but seeing him here, hearing his taunts again, it's brought it all back. When that string snapped during my performance, I saw him smirk, just like he used to when I'd falter in lessons. I'm certain he's behind it, trying to sabotage me, to reclaim the spotlight he's lost." She paused, her hands clenching into fists, and then added, almost in a whisper, "But there's more, Miss Marple. Something I haven't told anyone, not even Clara." "Miss." Marple leaned forward slightly, her eyes kind but piercing, sensing the weight of Eliza's confession. "Go on, my dear," she said softly. "Whatever it is, you can trust me to listen without judgment. Secrets have a way of growing heavier when kept alone." Eliza swallowed hard, her gaze darting to the conservatory's glass walls, as if ensuring they were alone. When I was studying under Julian, she said, her voice barely audible, there was an incident. A recital much like this one, where I was to perform a difficult Pisa list etude he'd chosen to test me. I was so nervous, and he kept pushing me, saying it was my chance to prove myself. But the night before, one found his sheet. Music, the one he was to play after me, and I tore it up. Her voice cracked, and she buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking. I was so angry, so scared he'd overshadow me. I thought if he couldn't perform, I'd have a moment to shine. He found out, of course, and he never forgave me. He dismissed me as his student, called me a jealous child. I've carried that guilt ever since. Miss Marple listened in silence, her face betraying no shock or disapproval, only a quiet understanding. She recalled a similar confession on St. Mary Mead, where a young seamstress had sabotaged a rival's dress out of desperation, only to be consumed by remorse. That was a heavy burden for a young girl to bear, she said gently, placing a reassuring hand on Eliza's arm. You were under great pressure, and youth often leads us to act impulsively. Have you reason to believe Julian knows you're here, or that he's acting on that old grudge? Eliza nodded, wiping her eyes with a handkerchief she pulled from her sleeve. He recognized me the moment I arrived, she said. He didn't say it outright, but the way he looked at me, the way he's been needling me, it's like he's waiting for me to fail again. And those notes I showed you, the ones telling me to leave, they're in his style, sharp and cutting, just like his words back then. I'm sure he's trying to scare me away to make sure I don't outshine him this time. Her hands trembled again, but Miss Marple noted a subtle shift in her demeanor, not just fear, but a flicker of something else, perhaps defiance or even guilt revisited. Miss Marple tilted her head, her mind turning over Eliza's words. The story of the torn sheet music was a revelation, shedding light on the depth of her rivalry with Julian, but it also raised questions. Eliza's guilt was palpable, but could it be masking something more recent? Her trembling hands, her insistence on Julian's guilt, were they purely the result of fear? Or was there a deeper secret, perhaps tied to the manuscript's theft or the piano sabotage? She thought of a village girl who had confessed to a minor theft to cover a larger one, and she wondered if Eliza's confession was entirely complete. Have you noticed anything else, my dear? Miss Marple asked, her tone gentle but probing. Anything about Julian's actions, or perhaps others in the house, that might connect to these incidents? Sometimes the smallest detail can illuminate the truth. Eliza hesitated, her fingers twisting the handkerchief. I saw Julian near the music room late yesterday, before the rehearsal, she said, her voice uncertain. He was carrying something, a small tool, I think, but I couldn't see it clearly. And then there's Sophia. She's been so kind, but she's been hovering around me, asking if I'm all right, almost too much. It makes me wonder if she knows something. She paused, then added, and Dr. Vance. He's always by that cabinet, staring at the manuscript. It's strange, like he's guarding it or planning something. Miss Marple nodded, filing away these observations. Eliza's mention of the tool aligned with her suspicions about the piano sabotage, and her comments about Sophia and Dr. Vance echoed her own observations of their behavior. But the tremor in Eliza's hands, the way her eyes darted away when speaking of her past, suggested there might be more she was withholding. Thank you for trusting me, Eliza, Miss Marple said, her voice warm. You've been very brave to share this. Rest assured, I'll keep my eyes open and we'll get to the bottom of this. For now, try to focus on your performance. It's your talent that will shine, no matter what shadows others cast. Eliza managed a small, grateful smile, though her eyes remained troubled. I'll try, Miss Marple, she said. I just want this recital to go well, for Clara's sake, and for the music school. I don't want my past to ruin it. She turned back to the piano, her fingers brushing the keys, and began to play a soft, tentative melody, as if seeking solace in the music. Miss Marple rose, her shawl adjusted neatly, and left the conservatory, her mind alight with new threads to weave into the mystery. Eliza's confession had illuminated the depth of her conflict with Julian, but it also raised questions about her own role in the current events. The torn sheet music from years ago was a youthful mistake, but could it have inspired a pattern of behavior? Had Eliza, fearing Julian's sabotage, taken steps to protect herself, steps that might connect the anonymous notes or even the manuscript's theft? And what if her observations about Sophia and Dr. Vance, were they genuine suspicions or a way to deflect attention? As she walked back to the main house, Miss Marple recalled a St. Mary Mead incident where a young man's confession of a petty theft had masked his involvement in a larger scheme. Eliza's guilt was real, but it might be a veil for something more. The lavender scent, the muddy smudge, the marked music. And now Eliza's past formed a complex score, and Miss Marple was determined to discern its true melody. For now, she tucked her observations away, her unassuming presence belying the sharpness of her mind, ready to listen for the next note in the unfolding symphony of secrets at Wentworth Hall. Chapter 8. A Village Discovery. Morning after her revealing conversation with Eliza Crane, Miss Jane Marple decided to venture beyond the confines of Wentworth Hall to the heart of Thornby-on-Sea, where the music school stood as the focal point of the upcoming recital's purpose. The mist that had cloaked the estate the previous day had lifted slightly, revealing a sky of soft gray, with the sea's restless murmur a constant companion. Miss Marple, dressed in her sensible tweed coat and sturdy shoes, carried her umbrella as a precaution against the unpredictable coastal weather. Her knitting bag, ever present, hung from her arm, a quiet emblem of her unassuming presence. The walk to the village was invigorating, the narrow lanes lined with stone walls and wildflowers, bending in the breeze. Thornby-on-Sea was a quaint settlement, its cobbled streets winding past weathered cottages and a small church whose steeple pierced the low clouds. The music school, a modest two-story building of red brick, stood at the village's edge, its windows adorned with posters advertising the recital. The building's faded paint and sagging roof spoke of financial strain, yet there was a warmth to it, a sense of community evident in the children's laughter drifting from an open window. Miss Marple entered the school, her steps light but purposeful, and was greeted by Miss Eleanor Pembury, the headmistress, a wiry woman in her 50s with sharp gray eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor softened by a genuine passion for her work. Her gray hair was pinned into a neat bun, and her dress, though plain, was immaculate, a testament to her pride in the school despite its struggles. "Miss Marple, what a pleasure," Miss Pembury said, her voice warm but tinged with fatigue, as she led her guest into a small office cluttered with sheet music and student records. "Clara mentioned you'd be visiting. I hope you're enjoying your stay at the hall, despite, well, the recent troubles." Miss Marple smiled, settling into a chair opposite Miss Pembury's desk, her hands folded neatly in her lap. "It's a charming village, Miss Pembury, and the hall is quite splendid, though I confess the incidents have cast a shadow. I thought a visit to the school might help me understand the recital's importance, and perhaps shed light on the tension surrounding it." Miss Pembury's eyes flickered with a mix of gratitude and concern, and she leaned forward, her hands clasped tightly. "The recital is our lifeline, Miss Marple," she said, her voice earnest. "The school's been struggling for years, fewer students, rising costs, and repairs we can't afford. Clara's been a godsend, funding us as best she can, but it's Sophia, her niece, who has truly taken up the cause." She's poured her heart into this event, hoping to draw wealthy donors from London and beyond. Without it, we may have to close by year's end. Miss Marple nodded, her mind cataloging the headmistress's words. Sophia's dedication had been evident, but so had her anxiety, and Miss Pembury's mention of financial woes added a new layer to the mystery. Sophia seems a determined young woman, Miss Marple said gently. It must be a heavy burden, organizing such an event under such pressure. Has she mentioned any particular challenges, or perhaps concerns about the performers? Miss Pembury hesitated, her fingers fidgeting with a pencil on her desk. Sophia's been stretched thin, she admitted, her tone careful. She has confided in me about her worries, personal ones, not just the school's. She's had financial troubles of her own, you see. A bad investment last year, something about a music academy in Bristol that went under. She's been scrambling to recover, and I think she sees the recital as a way to secure her future as much as the school's. She paused, then added, she's mentioned tension among the performers, especially between Mr. Moreau and Miss Crane. She's tried to keep the peace, but I suspect it's wearing on her. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed slightly, though her smile remained kind. Sophia's financial difficulties were a significant revelation, suggesting a motive beyond altruism. Could her desperation have led her to orchestrate the incidents at the hall, perhaps to draw attention to the recital, or to distract from something else? That's most illuminating, Miss Pembury, Miss Marple said. It's clear the school means a great deal to Sophia, and to you. Have you noticed anything unusual in the village, perhaps visitors or strangers, that might connect to the events at the hall? Miss Pembury's brow furrowed, and she leaned back, her gaze drifting to the window. Nothing specific, no, she said, then paused, as if recalling something. Though one of our groundskeepers, old Tom Harrow, did mention something odd. He was in the village last night near the hall's grounds, and saw a cloaked figure moving through the mist, carrying a bundle. He thought it was someone from the hall, perhaps a guest, but it was too dark to tell. He didn't think much of it until he heard about the theft this morning. Miss Marple's interest sharpened, though her expression remained placid. "A cloaked figure with a bundle," she murmured, her mind conjuring images of the music room's open window and the missing manuscript. Did Mr. Harrow say where this figure was headed or describe them further? Miss Pembury shook her head. Tom's not one for details, I'm afraid. He said they were moving toward the cliffs, but he lost sight of them in the mist. He's a bit superstitious, prone to seeing ghosts in every shadow, so I didn't press him. But with the manuscript gone, it does make one wonder. She sighed, her shoulders sagging. I hope it's not connected, Miss Marple. This school can't afford more scandal. Miss Marple nodded, her mind racing with possibilities. The cloaked figure could be a vital clue, suggesting an outsider's involvement or a carefully staged act by someone within the hall. The bundle might have been the manuscript or a decoy to mislead observers. She recalled a St. Mary Mead incident where a villager had claimed to see a ghost near a stolen painting, only for it to be a thief in disguise. Thank you, Miss Pembury, she said, her voice warm. You've been most helpful. I'd like to speak with Mr. Harrow, if I may. Sometimes the simplest observations hold the key to a puzzle. Miss Pembury agreed, summoning the young student to fetch the groundskeeper. While they waited, she offered Miss Marple a tour of the school, and they walked through classrooms where children practiced scales on worn pianos and a small auditorium, with peeling paint but a stage polished with care. Miss Marple noted the pride in Miss Pembury's voice as she described the students' progress, and the headmistress's dedication reminded her of Clara's own commitment to the school. Tom Harrow arrived shortly, a stooped man in his 70s, with weathered hands and a face creased by years of coastal winds. His cap was clutched nervously in his hands, and his eyes darted about, as if wary of being overheard. "Miss Pembury said you wanted to know about last night," he said gruffly, his voice thick with a local accent. "I don't know much, mind, but I'll tell you what I saw." Miss Marple smiled, her demeanor disarming, as if chatting with an old friend in St. Mary Mead. "Any detail, however small, is valuable, Mr. Harrow," she said. "Tell me about this figure you saw near the hall. What time was it, and what exactly did you notice?" Tom scratched his chin, his eyes narrowing as he recalled the moment. "Must have been near midnight, maybe a bit after," he said. "I was coming back from the pub, talking the path by the hall's grounds. The mist was thick, but I saw a figure, all cloaked in dark, moving quick-like near the east gate. They had a bundle under their arm, wrapped in cloth, about the size of a book or such. I thought it queer, but I didn't call out, didn't want trouble. They headed toward the cliffs, where the path drops to the beach. I lost them in the fog after that." Miss Marple listened intently, her mind piecing together the timeline. The crash in the music room had occurred shortly after midnight, suggesting the figure Tom saw could have been fleeing the scene or setting up a distraction. "Did you notice anything about their height or how they moved?" she asked. "Or perhaps a scent or a sound?" Tom frowned, thinking hard. "They was average height, I'd say, not too tall. Moved quick, like they knew the path well. No sound, save their steps crunching on the gravel. Didn't smell nothing but the sea and the mist." He paused, then added, "There was one thing, though. The cloak had a bit of a shine, like it was wet from the mist, and I thought I saw a flash of something bright at the hem, maybe a bit of color. Red or green, but it was hard to tell in the dark." Miss Marple's eyes gleamed with interest, though her face remained composed. The flash of color red or green brought to mind Sophia's vibrant dresses, often crimson or emerald, but it could also be a coincidence, or a deliberate misdirection. "You've been very helpful, Mr. Harrow," she said, her voice warm. "If you recall anything else, do let Miss Pembury know. It's often the smallest things that make all the difference." Tom nodded, tipping his cap, and shuffled off, leaving. Miss Marple with Miss Pembury. The headmistress looked troubled, her hands twisting together. "Do you think it's connected, Miss Marple? The theft, the figure, all of it?" Miss Marple patted her arm reassuringly. "It's too early to say, my dear, but every piece of information helps. The truth has a way of revealing itself, like a melody emerging from a jumble of notes." She smiled, her unassuming presence belying the sharpness of her mind, and took her leave, promising to return for the recital dot as she walked back to Wentworth Hall. Miss Marple's thoughts churned. Sophia's financial troubles suggested a motive for desperate measures, perhaps even staging incidents to ensure the recital's success. The cloaked figure, with its bundle and flash of color, pointed to someone familiar with the hall's grounds. Sophia, perhaps, or another guest cloaking their identity. The manuscript's theft, the piano sabotage, and now this sighting formed a complex pattern. And Miss Marple recalled a village theft where a stranger seen in the woods had been a local in disguise. She tucked Tom's description away, alongside Eliza's confession and Dr. Vance's fixation, her mind weaving the threads into a tapestry that was slowly taking shape. Back at the hall, the air was thick with anticipation and suspicion, the recital drawing ever closer. Miss Marple removed her coat, her eyes drifting to the sea beyond the cliffs, its rhythm a reminder of time's relentless march. The village discovery had added a new note to the mystery, and she was determined to hear its echo in the days to come. Chapter 9. The pianist's facade the day of the recital drew closer, and Wentworth Hall buzzed with a frenetic energy, tempered by the lingering shadow of the manuscript's theft and the earlier sabotage. The grand drawing room, with its velvet drapes and crackling fireplace, had become a stage for the performers' preparations. where tensions simmered beneath polite exchanges. Miss Jane Marple, ever the quiet observer, sat in her usual corner near the window, her knitting bag at her feet and a cup of tea in her hands. Her pale blue eyes, sharp despite her gentle demeanor, missed nothing as she watched the group, her mind weaving together the clues from her recent discoveries, Sophia's financial troubles, the cloaked figure seen by Tom Harrow, and Eliza's confession about her past with Julien Moreau. Julien, the flamboyant French pianist, was in his element, holding court near the fireplace, with a small audience of Clara's guests and local dignitaries who had arrived early for the recital. His silk cravat gleamed in the firelight, and his mustache twitched with each theatrical gesture as he recounted a tale of his triumphs at the Théâtre des Champs-Élysées. His voice, rich and resonant, filled the room, drawing laughter and admiring glances, but Miss Marple noted the calculated precision in his charm, as if each word were a note in a carefully composed performance. He spoke of Paris, of sold-out concerts and adoring crowds, yet there was a brittleness to his bravado, a hint of desperation to reclaim a spotlight that had dimmed in recent years. Eliza Crane, seated at the edge of the group, listened in silence, her auburn hair tightly pinned and her gray dress a stark contrast to Julien's flamboyance. Her hands were folded in her lap, but Miss Marple caught the faint tremor in her fingers, a reminder of her earlier confession about her youthful sabotage of Julien's sheet music and her fear that he was now retaliating. Eliza's green eyes flickered toward Julien, a mix of resentment and apprehension in her gaze, and Miss Marple wondered if her fear was rooted solely in the past, or if she sensed something more immediate. Sophia Langley, bustling about with her usual energy, ensured. The guests' teacups were filled, and the conversation flowed smoothly. Her emerald dress stood out against the room's muted tones, but her smile was strained, her chestnut curls slightly askew as she darted between tasks. Miss Marple noted the way Sophia's eyes lingered on Julien, not with admiration, but with a wary intensity, as if she were monitoring his performance for floss. Dr. Harold Vance, meanwhile, stood by the window, his tweed suit as rumpled as ever, his notebook clutched tightly as he muttered to himself about the manuscript's loss. His obsession with the Beethoven sketch was palpable, and Miss Marple recalled his nervous deflection during their library conversation, wondering if his scholarly zeal masked a deeper motive. As Julien's story reached its crescendo, a dramatic account of a standing ovation that had lasted 10 minutes, Miss Marple's attention sharpened. She noticed a subtle movement as Julien adjusted his velvet jacket, his hand slipping into his pocket with a practiced ease. For a fleeting moment, she glimpsed a metallic glint, a small, well-shaped tool, its handle worn from use, before it disappeared into the folds of his clothing. Her mind flashed to the snapped piano string during Eliza's rehearsal, and she recognized the object as a tuning wrench, a tool capable of adjusting a piano's strings to either perfect harmony or deliberate discord. The discovery was a quiet thunderclap in her thoughts, aligning with Eliza's suspicions and the chalk mark she had observed on the piano's lid. Miss Marple sipped her tea, her expression unchanged, but her mind raced. She recalled a St. Mary Mead incident where a gardener had tampered with a rival's roses using a pruning tool, his sabotage disguised as an accident. Julien's theatrical charm, his smirks at Eliza's expense, and now this tuning wrench suggested a man capable of calculated malice, perhaps driven by envy of Eliza's rising star. Yet Miss Marple knew better than to leap to conclusions. The wrench was a clue, not proof, and Julien's motives might extend beyond personal rivalry. Could he be connected to the manuscript's theft, using the piano sabotage as a distraction? Or was his focus solely on undermining Eliza? Seizing an opportunity as the group dispersed for a brief rehearsal, Miss Marple approached Julien, her demeanor as unassuming as ever. "Mr. Moreau," she said, her voice gentle and slightly admiring, Your stories are quite captivating. It must be thrilling to perform on such grand stages. I imagine preparing for this recital in such an intimate setting requires a different kind of precision, perhaps even tending to the instruments yourself. Julian turned to her, his mustache curling with a charming smile, though his eyes held a flicker of wariness. "Why, Miss Marple, you're too kind," he said, his French accent lending a melodic lilt to his words. Indeed, a pianist must be a bit of a craftsman, ensuring the instrument sings as it should. But I leave such technicalities to the professionals here at the hall. My focus is on the music itself. He gestured expansively as if to dismiss the notion, but Miss Marple noted the slight tightening of his jaw, a telltale sign of discomfort. "Of course," Miss Marple said, her smile disarming. "Though I did notice you near the piano yesterday, during the preparations. It's heartening to see such dedication." Her tone was light, but her eyes were keen, watching for his reaction. Julian's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, then returned with renewed vigor. "Merely ensuring the stage was set, my dear lady," he said, his voice smooth. "A performer's instinct, you understand. Now, if you'll excuse me, I must review my list." He bowed slightly and moved toward the music room, his steps brisk. As if eager to escape her scrutiny, Miss Marple watched him go, her mind cataloging the exchange. Julian's deflection was polished, but his unease was evident, and the tuning wrench in his pocket was a tangible link to the piano sabotage. She thought of Eliza's fear, her claim that Julian resented her success, and the anonymous notes urging her to leave. The wrench suggested Julian had the means to tamper with the piano, but why? To frighten Eliza, to disrupt the recital, or to create a diversion for another purpose, perhaps tied to the manuscript's theft? Miss Marple recalled a village fete where a sabotaged cake had been a ploy to distract from a stolen necklace, and she wondered if Julian's actions were part of a larger scheme. As the guests reconvened for tea, Miss Marple resumed her seat, her eyes drifting to the others. Sophia, now speaking with Clara, seemed distracted, her fingers fidgeting with a pearl brooch, and Miss Marple recalled Miss Pembry's revelation about her financial troubles. Could Sophia's desperation have led her to collude with Julian, or was she merely a stress organizer caught in the crossfire? Eliza, still pale, avoided Julian's gaze, her hands clasped tightly, and Miss Marple noted the weight of her guilt from her past actions, wondering if it colored her perceptions of Julian's motives. Dr. Vance, meanwhile, lingered near the fireplace, his notebook open, his lips moving as if rehearsing a lecture or perhaps a defense. The afternoon wore on, and Miss Marple's thoughts turned to the cloaked figure Tom Harrow had seen, carrying a bundle near the hall's grounds. Julian's theatrical nature made him a candidate for such a disguise, but so did Sophia's vibrant wardrobe and Dr. Vance's access to the manuscript. The lavender scent in the music room, linked to Sophia, added another layer, and Miss Marple considered whether Julian might have used it to mislead investigators, or if Sophia herself had been present during the theft. The tuning wrench, though, was a concrete clue, anchoring her suspicions to Julian's actions, and she resolved to keep a closer eye on him during the rehearsal. As the group moved to the music room for a final practice, Miss Marple lingered, her gaze settling on the piano, its polished surface gleaming under the chandelier's light. She recalled the chalk mark, now gone, and the snapped string, each a note in a discordant melody. Julian's facade, his charm, his stories, his gallant bows, was a performance, but beneath it lay a man capable of petty cruelty, perhaps driven by a need to reclaim his former glory. She thought of a St. Mary Mead musician who had sabotaged a rival's violin out of envy, his downfall revealed by a misplaced rosin cloth. Julian's tuning wrench was a similar slip, and Miss Marple was determined to follow its trail. For now she joined the others in the music room, her shawl draped neatly over her shoulders, her knitting bag a silent companion. The recital was hours away, and the hall's secrets were unfolding like a complex sonata. Julian's facade was beginning to crack, and Miss Marple, with her quiet persistence, was ready to peer through the gaps, seeking the truth hidden in the shadows of his. Performance. Chapter 10. A clever disguiseth afternoon before the recital. Wentworth Hall was a hive of activity, with servants polishing silver, arranging flowers, and setting chairs in the music room for the anticipated crowd. The air was thick with anticipation, but also with an undercurrent of unease, as the theft of the Beethoven manuscript and the piano sabotage continued to cast a pall over the preparations. Miss Jane Marple, ever attuned to the subtleties of human behavior, sensed the moment was ripe to draw up the culprit or culprits behind the incidents. Her mind, sharp as ever, wove together the clues she had gathered: the lavender scent, the muddy smudge, the marked music, Eliza's confession, Sophia's financial woes, the cloaked figure, and Julian's tuning wrench. Each was a thread in a tapestry of deception, and Miss Marple resolved to tug at them with a carefully crafted plan. Seated in the drawing room with Clara Wentworth, Miss Marple sipped her tea, her pale blue eyes calm but alert. The room was quieter now, with most guests occupied elsewhere, and Clara's silver hair gleamed in the soft light filtering through the tall windows. Her face, though composed, betrayed the strain of recent events, her hands twisting a lace handkerchief as she spoke. "Jane, I don't know how we'll get through this recital," she confided, her voice low. "The manuscript's loss is a blow, and I fear these accidents are no coincidence. What if something else goes wrong tomorrow?" Miss Marple set her teacup down, her expression one of gentle reassurance, though her mind was alight with purpose. "Clara, my dear, I've seen many a storm in St. Mary Mead, and they often clear when you shine a light on the shadows. I have an idea, small deception, if you're willing to flush out whoever's behind these troubles. People reveal themselves when they think their secrets are at risk." Clara's eyes widened, a spark of hope mingling with curiosity. "A deception? Oh, Jane, you always were clever. What do you propose?" Miss Marple leaned closer, her voice soft but firm. "We'll announce that the manuscript has been found recovered from a hidden nook in the music room, perhaps, and that it will be displayed before the recital, as a surprise for the guests. We'll say it's under lock and key, but we'll watch closely to see who reacts, who lingers, or who tries to get near it. A thief or someone with a guilty conscience may betray themselves in their haste to act." Clara nodded slowly, her brow furrowing as she considered the plan. "It's bold, Jane, but it might work. I'll trust your judgment. How shall we proceed?" Miss Marple outlined the details, suggesting they gather the performers and key guests in the drawing room that evening to make the announcement. She advised Clara to speak with conviction, emphasizing the manuscript's safety, and to instruct Mr. Gibbs, the caretaker, to guard the music room visibly, creating the impression of heightened security. Miss Marple, meanwhile, would position herself to observe the group's reactions, her unassuming presence allowing her to blend into the background. "And Clara," she added, her eyes twinkling with quiet determination, "let's ensure Sophia is there. Her role in organizing the recital makes her central to this drama, and I'd like to see how she responds." Clara agreed, her resolve strengthening, and they set the plan in motion. That evening, as the sun dipped below the cliffs of Thornby-on-Sea, casting long shadows across the hall, the drawing room filled with the performers, Clara's guests, and a few local dignitaries. The fire crackled in the hearth, its glow softening the room's faded opulence, but the atmosphere was tense, the weight of recent events palpable. Julian Morel, his silk cravat pristine, stood near the fireplace, his charm subdued but his eyes restless. Eliza Crane sat in a corner, her hands clasped tightly, her green eyes darting nervously. Dr. Harold Vance, his tweed suit rumpled, clutched his notebook, his spectacles slipping as he muttered about the manuscript's historical significance. Sophia Langley, in a crimson dress, moved among the group, her smile forced, her chestnut curls slightly disheveled from her frantic preparations. Clara stepped forward, her deep blue gown lending her an air of authority, and raised a hand for silence. "My dear friends," she began, her voice steady despite the strain in her eyes, "I have heartening news amidst our recent troubles. This afternoon, Mr. Gibbs discovered the Beethoven manuscript hidden in a concealed panel in the music room's bookcase. It's safe and secure, under lock and key, and we plan to display it tomorrow before the recital as a testament to our resilience and the importance of this event." She paused, her gaze sweeping the room, and added, "We're working with Inspector Lyle to ensure nothing else goes amiss, and I thank you all for your patience." The room erupted in murmurs, a mix of relief and skepticism. Miss Marple, seated near the window with her knitting bag at her feet, watched closely, her eyes flicking from face to face. Julian's mustache twitched, his smile tight, and he raised a glass of sherry and a theatrical toast, though his eyes darted toward the music room's direction. Eliza's shoulders relaxed slightly, but her gaze lingered on Julian, a flicker of suspicion in her expression. Dr. Vance's face flushed, his fingers tightening around his notebook, and he muttered something about the manuscript's authenticity, his voice barely audible. Sophia, however, reacted most strikingly. Her smile faltered, her hand freezing mid-gesture as she poured tea, and her eyes widened with a flash of panic before she quickly masked it with a laugh. "That's wonderful, Clara," she said, her voice overly bright. "What a relief for us all." Miss Marple noted each reaction, her mind cataloging the nuances. Julian's forced cheer suggested unease, perhaps fearing the manuscripts. Recovery would shift focus from his performance. Eliza's suspicion aligned with her belief in Julian's sabotage, but her relief hinted at no deeper involvement. Dr. Vance's agitation was telling, his obsession with the manuscript evident, but it was Sophia's panic that intrigued Miss Marple most. The lavender scent in the music room, linked to Sophia and her financial troubles, revealed by Miss Pembry, painted her as a figure of complexity desperate, perhaps, to ensure the recital's success, or to hide a more personal agenda. As the group dispersed, Miss Marple excused herself, slipping quietly toward the music room under the pretense of fetching her shawl. She positioned herself in a shadowed alcove near the entrance, where she could observe without being seen, her small flashlight tucked into her sleeve for emergencies. The room was dimly lit, the grand piano silent, and Mr. Gibbs stood by the door, his weathered face set in a frown as he followed Clara's instructions to guard the space. Miss Marple waited, her patience honed by years of unraveling village mysteries, knowing that a guilty party might seize the moment to act. Minutes passed, marked by the distant crash of waves against the cliffs, and then a soft creak of floorboards announced an approach. Sophia appeared, her crimson dress a vivid splash in the gloom, her movements furtive as she glanced over her shoulder. She slipped into the music room, bypassing Mr. Gibbs, who had stepped away briefly to check the windows. Sophia moved to the bookcase Clara had mentioned, her hands trembling as she ran her fingers along its panels, searching frantically for the supposed hidden compartment. Her breathing was rapid, her face pale, and Miss Marple noted the desperation in her actions, as if the manuscript's recovery threatened more than the recital's narrative. Miss Marple stepped forward, her voice gentle but firm, cutting through the silence like a clear note. "Miss Langley, I believe you're looking for something that isn't there." Sophia gasped, spinning around, her hand flying to her chest. "Miss Marple, I was just..." checking the bookcase, ensuring everything's in order for tomorrow. Her voice was strained, her eyes wide with fear, and Miss Marple saw the sheen of perspiration on her brow. Miss Marple approached, her demeanor calm, but her eyes piercing. "There's no need to pretend, my dear," she said softly. "The manuscript wasn't found. It was a ruse to see who might act. Your reaction, and now your search, suggests you know more about these incidents than you've let on. Won't you tell me the truth? Secrets are heavy burdens, and I found they're lighter when shared." Sophia's shoulders slumped, her defiance crumbling under Miss Marple's steady gaze. She sank onto a nearby chair, her hands covering her face, and when she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Oh, Miss Marple, I didn't mean for it to go this far," she said, her words tumbling out. "I staged some of the accidents, the missing sheet music, the broken metronome, even the stage light that nearly fell. I thought if there was a bit of drama, it would draw more attention to the recital, bring in bigger donors to save the school. I was so desperate, with my own debts piling up and the school on the brink, but I swear, I didn't steal the manuscript. I don't know who did. I thought it was real when Clara announced it, and I panicked, thinking my little schemes might be exposed." Miss Marple listened, her expression one of quiet understanding, though her mind was sharp, assessing Sophia's confession. The admission explained the minor incidents, aligning with Sophia's financial desperation and her role as the recital's organizer. The lavender scent in the music room could be hers, a careless trace left during her sabotage. But her denial of the manuscript's theft rang true. Her panic had been genuine, not the calculated response of a thief. Miss Marple recalled a St. Mary Mead scandal where a villager had staged a theft to boost a charity event, only to be caught when her overzealousness betrayed her. Sophia's actions were misguided, but they didn't fully account for the manuscript. Or the piano sabotage. "Thank you for your honesty, Sophia," Miss Marple said, her voice kind but firm. "You've done wrong, but your heart was in the right place, and there's time to make amends. I'll speak to Clara, and we'll keep this between us for now, provided you promise to cease these deceptions and help ensure the recital goes smoothly. But tell me, have you noticed anything at all that might point to the manuscript's thief or the piano's saboteur?" Sophia nodded, wiping her eyes with a trembling hand. I saw Julian near the music room late. The night before the rehearsal," she said, her voice hesitant. "He was adjusting the piano, he said, but he had a strange look, like he was hiding something. And Dr. Vance, he's been so odd about that manuscript, always hovering near the cabinet, asking Clara questions about its history. I thought he was just obsessed, but now I'm not sure." She paused, then added, "And Eliza, she's been so jumpy, but I thought it was just nerves." "I don't know, Miss Marple, it's all so muddled." Miss Marple patted Sophia's arm, her mind cataloging the information. Julian's presence at the piano aligned with the tuning wrench she had seen, and Dr. Vance's fixation remained a point of suspicion. Eliza's jumpiness was consistent with her confessed guilt and fear, but Sophia's observations added no new clarity there. "You've been very helpful, my dear," Miss Marple said. "Go back to the others and Carrie, and as if nothing's happened. We're close to the truth, I believe, and tomorrow's recital may yet reveal it." Sophia nodded, her face a mix of relief and shame, and slipped out of the music room, leaving Miss Marple alone with her thoughts. The plan had worked, exposing Sophia's minor deceptions, but the larger mysteries, the manuscript's theft and the piano sabotage, remained unsolved. The lavender scent, the tuning wrench, the cloaked figure, and Dr. Vance's obsession formed a complex score, and Miss Marple sensed the crescendo was near. She adjusted her shawl, her eyes drifting to the piano, its silent strings a reminder of the discord yet to be resolved. With the recital looming, she knew the next hours would be critical, and she was ready to listen for the final notes of this intricate melody. Chapter 11. The recital begins. The evening of the recital arrived at Wentworth Hall with a palpable sense of anticipation. The grand music room transformed into a stage of elegance and expectation. The oak-paneled walls, polished to a warm sheen, glowed under the light of the crystal chandelier, its prisms scattering flecks of brilliance across the rows of velvet-upholstered chairs. The Steinway grand piano, meticulously repaired after the snap-string incident, stood as the centerpiece, its ebony surface reflecting the flickering candlelight. Outside, the cliffs of Thornby-on-Sea loomed in the twilight, the sea's rhythmic crash a distant counterpoint to the murmurs of the arriving audience. Local dignitaries, London music patrons, and villagers eager to support the music school. Miss Jane Marple, seated in a discreet chair near the stage, blended seamlessly with the crowd, her sensible gray dress and shawl rendering her nearly invisible among the more flamboyant attendees. Her knitting bag rested at her feet, a silent companion, but her pale blue eyes were alert, scanning the room with the precision of a conductor studying a score. The events of the past days, the manuscript's theft, Sophia's confession, Julian's tuning wrench, and the cloaked figure formed a complex melody in her mind, and she sensed the recital would be more than a performance. It would be the stage for the mystery's next act. Clara Wentworth, resplendent in a sapphire gown, greeted guests at the entrance. Her silver hair swept into an elegant bun, her smile warm but tinged with the strain of recent events. Sophia Langley, in a deep emerald dress, moved with frenetic energy, ensuring programs were distributed and performers were ready, her chestnut curls pinned haphazardly, betraying her lingering anxiety. Miss Marple noted Sophia's quick glances toward the audience, as if searching for reassurance that her staged incidents had drawn the desired crowd. Inspector Lyle, present at Clara's request, stood near the back, his stout frame and no-nonsense demeanor a quiet assurance of security. His notebook tucked into his coat, the performers were a study in contrasts. Eliza Crane, in a simple black gown that accentuated her auburn hair, sat backstage, her hands clasped tightly, her green eyes focused inward as she mentally rehearsed her Chopin nocturne. Miss Marple, catching a glimpse of her through the stage curtain, saw the young woman's resolve, a determination to rise above her fears and Julian's shadow. Julian Morel, by contrast, was in his element, his burgundy tailcoat and silk cravat, drawing admiring glances as he mingled with guests, his mustache curling with each charming remark. Yet Miss Marple noted the restlessness in his eyes, a flicker of unease that belied his theatrical confidence, perhaps tied to the tuning wrench she had seen, or the ruse about the manuscript's recovery. Dr. Harold Vance, in his rumpled tweed suit, lingered near the glass display case, now empty of the Beethoven manuscript that filled with lesser scores for show. His spectacles slipped down his nose as he scribbled in his notebook, his lips moving as if cataloging observations, or rehearsing a defense. Miss Marple recalled his obsession with the manuscript and his nervous deflection in the library, wondering if his scholarly zeal had led him to cross ethical lines. Mr. Gibbs, the caretaker, stood by the music room's entrance, his weathered face set in a frown, his presence a reminder of the heightened security following the theft. As the audience settled, Sophia stepped onto the stage, her voice clear but trembling slightly, like a string tuned too tightly. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen," she said, clasping her hands to steady them. "On behalf of Mrs. Wentworth and the Thornby-on-Sea Music School, I welcome you to this evening's recital, a celebration of music and a fundraiser to ensure our school's future. Despite recent challenges, we are honored to present our talented performers whose artistry will inspire us all." Her words were met with polite applause. and Miss Marple noted the relief in Sophia's eyes as she stepped aside. The crowd's enthusiasm a validation of her efforts, however misguided. Eliza was the first to perform, her entrance marked by a hush that fell over the room. She settled at the piano, her posture rigid at first, then softening as she began Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, the same piece interrupted by the snap string. The notes flowed like a gentle tide, each phrase imbued with a haunting melancholy that captivated the audience. Miss Marple, though no expert in music, felt the emotion in Eliza's playing. Noting how her earlier fears dissolved, her face illuminated by a quiet passion. The chandelier's light cast soft shadows across her features, and for those moments, the room was united in the spell of her music. The tensions of the past days forgotten, the performance was flawless, the final notes lingering in the air like a sigh, and the audience erupted in applause, some rising to their feet. Eliza rose, her cheeks flushed with relief and pride, and bowed, her eyes briefly meeting Miss Marple's, a silent acknowledgement of their earlier conversation. Miss Marple smiled, her heart warmed by the young woman's triumph, but her mind remained vigilant, knowing the night was far from over. Julian followed, his entrance a theatrical flourish, his hands raised as if to embrace the applause before he even began. He announced his piece, a virtuosic Liszt rhapsody with a booming voice, his smile radiating confidence. As he settled at the piano, his fingers poised with dramatic flair, Miss Marple leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. She recalled the tuning wrench, the chalk mark, and Eliza's fear that Julian sought to sabotage her, and she watched his every move, alert for any sign of mischief. The rhapsody began with a cascade of brilliant notes, Julian's hands dancing across the keys with a showman's energy, the music a torrent of passion and bravura. The audience was enthralled, leaning forward in their seats, but Miss Marple's attention was drawn to a faint, unnatural sound, a low, persistent hum, like a distant swarm of bees emanating from the piano. The hum grew, disrupting the rhapsody's flow, and Julian's face tightened, his fingers faltering as the discordant noise clashed with his melody. The audience murmured, some shifting uncomfortably, and Miss Marple's gaze sharpened, her instincts honed by years of unraveling village mysteries. As Julian struggled to continue, the hum intensified, and Miss Marple caught a faint glint under the piano. Near the pedal mechanism, a metallic shimmer, barely visible in the stages. Glow. She rose quietly, slipping closer to the stage, under the pretense of adjusting her shawl, her eyes fixed on the glint. It was a small magnet, strategically placed to interfere with the piano's strings, creating the disruptive hum. The discovery was a silent thunderclap in her thoughts, confirming her suspicions of deliberate sabotage, and she glanced at Julian, whose frustration was now evident, his performance crumbling under the mechanical discord. Inspector Lyle, alerted by the disturbance, moved swiftly from the back of the room, his eyes meeting Miss Marple's in a moment of unspoken understanding. She nodded slightly, directing his attention to the magnet, and he signaled to Mr. Gibbs, who approached the stage with a constable. Julian, sensing the shift, stopped playing, his hand slamming onto the keys in a final jarring chord. He rose, his face flushed with a mix of anger and embarrassment, and addressed the audience with a forced laugh. "A technical difficulty, Miss Amos," he said, his voice strained. "These old instruments, they have their moods, non?" But his eyes darted toward the piano, and Miss Marple noted the flicker of panic in his expression, as if he feared discovery. Inspector Lyle stepped onto the stage, his voice calm but authoritative. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated. We'll pause the performance to address this issue. Mr. Gibbs, secure the piano and ensure no one approaches it." The audience buzzed with speculation, and Miss Marple returned to her seat, her mind racing. The magnet was a deliberate act, echoing the snap string, and its placement suggested someone with intimate knowledge of the piano Julian, with his tuning wrench was the obvious suspect, but Miss Marple considered other possibilities. Could Dr. Vance, with his access to the music room, have planted it to discredit Julian, or was Sophia's desperation a factor, despite her confession? Clara, her face pale, joined Inspector Lyle on stage, whispering urgently, while Sophia hovered. Nearby, her hands twisting together, her earlier confidence shattered. Eliza, backstage, watched with wide eyes, her relief at her own success tempered by the unfolding drama. Dr. Vance, still by the display case, scribbled furiously in his notebook, his agitation evident, and Miss Marple wondered if his obsession with the manuscript connected to this new sabotage dot as Mr. Gibbs knelt to retrieve the magnet. Miss Marple's thoughts turned to a St. Mary Mead incident where a tampered bell had disrupted a church service. Revealing a rival's spite, the magnet was a bold move, designed to humiliate Julian publicly, but it also risked exposing the saboteur. She recalled the chalk mark, the lavender scent, and the cloaked figure, each a note in a discordant symphony, and she sensed the mystery's climax was nearer. For now she sat quietly, her shawl draped neatly, her eyes sweeping the room, ready to catch the next false note in the unfolding performance. Chapter 12. The Phantom Unmasked Music Room of Wentworth Hall. Moments after the disruptive hum had derailed Julian Moreau's performance was a tableau of tension and confusion. The audience, still seated, whispered among themselves, their murmurs blending with the distant crash of waves against the cliffs of Thornby-on-Sea. The grand piano, its strings now silent, stood as a mute witness to the sabotage. The small magnet retrieved by Mr. Gibbs, glinting in his calloused hand under the chandelier's light. Inspector Lyle, his stout frame commanding the stage, directed the constable to secure the area, his notebook open as he prepared to question the performers. Clara Wentworth, her sapphire gown catching the candlelight, stood beside him, her face pale but resolute, while Sophia Langley hovered nearby, her emerald dress vibrant, but her expression fraught with anxiety. Miss Jane Marple, seated near the stage, remained an unobtrusive figure, her gray dress and shawl blending with the shadows, her knitting bag at her feet a silent emblem of her quiet vigilance. Her pale blue eyes, sharp and discerning, swept the room, cataloging the reactions of the key players. Julian, his theatrical composure fraying as he paced near the piano. Eliza Crane, backstage, her relief at her own flawless performance tempered by wary glances at Julian. Dr. Harold Vance, by the empty display case, his spectacles slipping as he scribbled furiously in his notebook. And Sophia, her hands twisting together, her earlier confession of minor sabotage weighing heavily on her. The magnet, a deliberate act of interference, was the latest note in a discordant melody, and Miss Marple sensed the time had come to unravel the mystery's core dot as the audience was politely asked to retire to the drawing room for refreshments. Inspector Lyle requested that the performers, Clara and Miss Marple, remain. The music room, now cleared of guests, felt cavernous, its oak-paneled walls and portraits of stern musicians amplifying the gravity of the moment. Miss Marple, at Clara's urging, stepped forward, her demeanor as unassuming as ever, but her voice carrying a quiet authority that commanded attention. "Inspector, if I may," she said, her tone gentle but firm, "I believe I can shed light on this evening's disruption, and perhaps on the other incidents that have plagued this recital." Inspector Lyle raised an eyebrow, his respect for Miss Marple's reputation evident, and nodded. "Go ahead, Miss Marple. You've a knack for seeing what others miss." Miss Marple adjusted her shawl, her eyes sweeping the group, each member a note in the complex score she had been piecing together. "This recital," she began, has been a stage not only for music, but for human nature, ambition, envy, and deception. The snapped piano string, the anonymous notes, the stolen manuscript, and now this magnet are not random acts, but parts of a pattern, woven by those among us with motives hidden beneath their performances. She turned to Julian, whose mustache twitched nervously, his hands clasped behind his back. Mr. Moreau, your talent is undeniable, but so is your rivalry with Miss Crane. Your career, once illustrious, has waned, while Eliza's star rises. I observed you with a tuning wrench, a tool capable of loosening a piano string or placing a magnet to disrupt a performance. The chalk mark on the piano lid, the smirk you wore when Eliza's string snapped, and now this magnet timed to ruin. Your own performance suggests a calculated plan, but why sabotage yourself unless it was to deflect suspicion or to frame another? Julian's face flushed, his charm giving way to indignation. "This is absurd, Miss Marple," he exclaimed, his French accent thickening. "Why would I ruin my own moment? I am a victim, not a villain." Yet his eyes darted toward Eliza, and Miss Marple noted the sweat beading on his brow. A crack in his theatrical facade. Miss Marple continued, her voice calm but relentless. The magnet's placement required intimate knowledge of the piano, and your presence near it before the rehearsal, as Sophia and Eliza both noted, places you at the scene. The anonymous notes to Eliza urging her to leave echo the cruel dismissals. You gave her, as a young student, a pattern of intimidation. I believe you loosened the string to frighten her, hoping to drive her from the recital, and place the magnet to create chaos, perhaps to cast suspicion on another, or to garner sympathy for yourself as a victim. The room was silent, the weight of her words settling over the group. Eliza's eyes widened, her hands clenching, while Sophia's breath caught, her confession of minor sabotage making her acutely aware of her own guilt. Dr. Vance adjusted his spectacles, his notebook forgotten, his agitation palpable. Inspector Lyle stepped forward, his voice gruff. "Mr. Moreau, what do you say to this? Did you tamper with the piano?" Julian's shoulders slumped, his defiance crumbling under the combined scrutiny of Miss Marple's logic and the inspector's authority. He ran a hand through his silver-streaked hair, his voice low and bitter. "Very well," he said, his accent softening with resignation. "I did it. I loosened the string to scare Eliza, to make her falter. She was my student once, and now she overshadows me. It stung more than I can say. The notes were mine, a foolish attempt to unsettle her. And the magnet, I placed it to disrupt my own performance, thinking it would make me seem a victim, draw attention back to me. But I swear I had nothing to do with the manuscript's theft. That was not my doing." Miss Marple nodded, her expression one of quiet satisfaction, but her mind was already shifting to the next thread. "Thank you, Mr. Moreau, for your honesty," she said. "Your actions were driven by envy, a common enough motive, but they explain only part of our mystery. The manuscripts. Theft is a deeper note, one that requires us to look elsewhere." She turned to Dr. Vance, whose face had paled, his fingers twitching around his notebook. "Dr. Vance, your passion for the Beethoven manuscript has been evident from the start. Your eagerness to authenticate it, your constant presence near the display case, your agitation when it was stolen. You suggested others might have lingered near the cabinet, yet it was you who checked its lock during the rehearsal, perhaps studying its vulnerabilities. The manuscript's value, as you said, is incalculable, not just monetarily, but to a scholar like yourself who believes such treasures belong in a museum." Dr. Vance's eyes darted, his voice rising in protest. "Miss Marple, this is preposterous. I'm a historian, not a thief. My interest was purely academic." Miss Marple raised a hand, her voice cutting through his denial like a clear note. Let us consider the facts. The lock was forced with precision, suggesting skill or knowledge, and the lavender scent in the music room, which I initially linked to Sophia, could have been a deliberate misdirection or an oversight by someone. With access to her perfume, I recalled a detail from our library conversation. Dr. Vance, your mention of the manuscript's paper type. A detail you could only know from close inspection, perhaps closer than the cabinet's glass allowed. And then there's the cloaked figure seen by Tom Harrow carrying a bundle, moving toward the cliffs. Your scholarly zeal, I suspect, led you to take the manuscript, believing you were preserving it for posterity. The room was taut with anticipation, and Inspector Lyle's eyes narrowed, his hand resting on his notebook. Dr. Vance, have you anything to add? He asked, his tone sharp. Dr. Vance's shoulders sagged, his notebook slipping to the floor with a soft thud. I meant no harm, he whispered, his voice breaking. The manuscript is a masterpiece, a piece of history Clara was hiding away. I thought if I could get it to the British Museum, it would be studied, celebrated. I used a tool to force the lock, wore a cloak to avoid detection, and hid the manuscript in my cello case, planning to smuggle it out after the recital. But I didn't touch the piano. That was Julian's doing. Miss Marple nodded, her mind aligning the final pieces. The lavender scent was a clever touch, perhaps borrowed from Sophia's room to mislead us. Your obsession blinded you, Dr. Vance, as Julian's envy blinded him. Sophia, for her part, admitted to staging minor incidents to draw attention to the recital, but she had no hand in these greater crimes. Clara, her face a mix of shock and relief, stepped forward. Jane, you've done it again, she said, her voice trembling. But how did you know? Miss Marple smiled, her eyes twinkling with quiet pride. In St. Mary Mead, I've seen how small details, a misplaced tool, a scent, a nervous glance revealed the truth. Here, the magnet pointed to Julian, the scent, and the lock to Dr. Vance, and Sophia's confession filled the gaps. Human nature, Clara, is the same everywhere, and it sings its secrets if you listen. Inspector Lyle, satisfied, signaled to the constable. Mr. Moreau, Dr. Vance, you'll come with me for further questioning. Miss Marple, your assistance has been invaluable. He turned to the group, his voice firm. The recital will resume shortly once we've cleared the stage. As Julian and Dr. Vance were led away, Eliza approached Miss Marple, her eyes glistening with gratitude. Thank you, Miss Marple, she said softly. I can play now, knowing the truth. Miss Marple patted her hand, her voice warm. You already played beautifully, my dear. The music was always yours to share. The room began to clear, and Miss Marple lingered, her gaze settling on the piano, its strings now free of sabotage. The phantom of Wentworth Hall had been unmasked, but the recital's melody was yet to finish, and she was ready to hear its final notes. Chapter 13. The final chord, the music room of Wentworth Hall, now cleared of the earlier disruption, hummed with a renewed sense of purpose as the audience filtered back to their seats, their whispers tinged with curiosity and relief. The chandeliers. Prisms cast a warm, fragmented glow across the oak-paneled walls, and the grand piano, its strings restored to harmony, stood ready for the recital's continuation. The air was heavy with the scent of beeswax and the faint saltiness of the sea beyond the cliffs, a reminder of Thornbeyondsea's enduring presence. Miss Jane Marple, seated once more near the stage, her gray dress and shawl blending with the shadows, observed the scene with quiet satisfaction. Her knitting bag rested at her feet, untouched, as her pale blue eyes scanned the room, ensuring no detail escaped her notice. The unmasking of Julian Moreau and Dr. Harold Vance had lifted the veil of suspicion that had shrouded the recital. Yet Miss Marple knew the final chords of this mystery required careful resolution. Julian's confession to sabotaging the piano booth, Eliza's performance with the snapped string and his own with the magnet had revealed a man consumed by envy. His once brilliant career tarnished by Eliza's rising star, Dr. Vance's. Admission to stealing the Beethoven manuscript, driven by a scholar's obsession to preserve it for posterity, had exposed a different kind of blindness, one where pride masqueraded as duty. Sophia Langley's earlier confession to staging minor incidents, though misguided, had been a lesser note in this discordant symphony, and Miss Marple sensed the young woman's remorse would guide her toward redemption. Clara Wentworth, her sapphire gown catching the candlelight, stood at the stage's edge, her silver hair gleaming as she addressed the audience with a composure that belied the turmoil of the past hours. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, her voice steady and warm, "I apologize for the interruption, but I'm pleased to assure you that the issues have been resolved, thanks to the keen insight of my dear friend, Miss Marple, and the diligence of Inspector Lyle. The Thornby-on-Sea Music School is the heart of this recital, and your presence tonight ensures its future. Let us now continue with the music, which speaks where words cannot." The audience applauded, their enthusiasm a testament to Clara's grace and the recital's importance. Miss Marple noted the relief in Clara's eyes, a silent gratitude for the truth's unveiling, and she caught Sophia's gaze from across the room. Sophia, in her emerald dress, stood near the back, her chestnut curls slightly askew, her hands clasped tightly. Her earlier panic had softened into a quiet resolve, and Miss Marple sensed she was grappling with her role in the events, determined to make amends. Eliza Crane, backstage, prepared for a second, brief performance to close the evening, her black gown stark against the stage's opulence, her green eyes bright with a newfound confidence, Inspector Lyle having escorted Julian and Dr. Vance to a side room for further questioning, returned to the music room, his stout frame a reassuring presence. He nodded to Miss Marple, his respect evident, and took a seat near the door, his notebook still in hand. Mr. Gibbs, the caretaker, stood by the entrance, his weathered face softened by a rare smile, as if the hall's secrets, now exposed, had lightened his burden. Miss Marple's thoughts turned to Dr. Vance, whose confession had been the final key to the mystery. She had suspected his involvement since their library conversation, where his fervent interest in the manuscript's paper type hinted at a closer inspection than the display case allowed. The lavender scent in the music room, initially linked to Sophia, had been a clever misdirection. Vance, she deduced, had borrowed a vial of Sophia's perfume from her dressing table, a detail confirmed when she recalled seeing a similar bottle in Sophia's room during a casual visit. The scent, combined with the forced lock's precision and the cloaked figure's description, pointed to Vance, whose scholarly zeal had morphed into a dangerous obsession. To confirm her theory, Miss Marple had discreetly examined Vance's belongings earlier that day, with Clara's permission, while he was occupied with the rehearsal. In his cello case, tucked beneath a false lining, she found a hidden compartment containing the manuscript, its yellowed pages carefully wrapped in cloth. The discovery was a quiet triumph, and she had informed Inspector Lyle, ensuring the evidence was secured before the recital's climax. The cloaked figure, seen by Tom Harrow, had been Vance, fleeing the music room with the manuscript, his path toward the cliffs a feint to suggest an outsider's theft. Vance's confession, under the pressure of Miss Marple's deductions, had been both a relief and a tragedy. "I thought I was saving it," he had said, his voice quavering as he removed his spectacles, his eyes glistening. Clara's family kept it locked away, a private trophy, when it could illuminate Beethoven's genius for the world. "I planned to deliver it to the British Museum anonymously to ensure its study, but I see now I was wrong." His scholarly pride, Miss Marple reflected, had blinded him to ethics, much as Julian's envy had blinded him to fairness. She recalled a St. Mary Mead antiquarian who had borrowed a rare book for safekeeping, only to be undone by his own meticulous notes, and she saw the same pattern in Vance's downfall. Eliza took the stage, her presence commanding despite her simplicity, and began a short encore, a delicate Mozart sonata, its clarity a balm after the evening's chaos. The notes flowed with a serene confidence, each phrase a testament to her resilience. Miss Marple watched, her heart warmed by the young woman's triumph, but her mind lingered on the broader canvas of human nature. Eliza's confession about her youthful sabotage of Julian's sheet music had been a key to understanding their rivalry, but her honesty had set her free, allowing her to shine tonight. Julian's actions, by contrast, had been a desperate bid to reclaim glory. His magnet and loosened string petty acts that mirrored the spite of a St. Mary Mead villager who had tampered with a rival's garden. Sophia, watching from the wings, wiped a tear from her cheek, her remorse evident. Miss Marple had spoken privately with Clara, urging leniency for Sophia's minor deceptions, given her genuine intent to save the music school. Clara had agreed, promising to guide her niece toward transparency, and Miss Marple sensed Sophia's gratitude in the fleeting smile she offered across the room. As Eliza's performance concluded, the audience rose in a standing ovation, their applause a crescendo of support for the music school and its performers. Clara joined Eliza on stage, her arm around the young woman, and announced that the recital had already raised significant funds, with more pledges expected. The manuscript, she revealed, had been recovered and would be safeguarded, its future to be decided with care. The crowd's cheers filled the room, a harmony that drowned out the earlier discord. Miss Marple remained seated, her hands folded in her lap, her thoughts drifting to the parallels between Wentworth Hall and her own St. Mary Mead. Ambition and envy, like false notes, could disrupt even the sweetest melody, but truth, when patiently sought, restored the balance. She recalled the chalk mark on the piano, the lavender scent, the muddy smudge, and the marked music, each a clue that had led her to the phantom's unmasking. The recital, now a triumph, was a reminder that music, like justice, endured through clarity and care. Inspector Lyle approached, his notebook tucked away, and offered a rare smile. "Miss Marple, you've outdone yourself," he said. "We'll have formal charges for Moreau and Vance by morning. Your eye for detail saved the day." Miss Marple smiled modestly, her eyes twinkling. "It's merely a matter of listening, Inspector. People, like pianos, reveal their true notes when you pay attention." As the audience dispersed, Miss Marple rose, her shawl adjusted neatly, and moved toward the drawing room where tea and conversation awaited. The final chord had sounded, but the melody of human nature, she knew, would always play on, ready for her to decipher its next refrain. Chapter 14. Harmony restoreth, morning after the triumphant recital. Wentworth Hall awoke to a serene calm, as if the resolution of its mysteries had lifted a weight from its ancient stones. The mist that had clung to Thornby-on-Sea for days had dissipated, revealing a sky of soft blue and a sea that sparkled under the rising sun. The cliffs beyond the hall stood sentinel, their rugged outlines softened by the light, and the distant crash of waves carried a rhythm of renewal. Inside, the grand dining room was bathed in sunlight streaming through tall windows, its mahogany table set with silver and porcelain for a farewell breakfast. The air was fragrant with the scent of fresh scones, coffee, and the faint tang of salt, a reminder of the coastal village's enduring presence. Miss Jane Marple, seated near Clara Wentworth at the head of the table, sipped her tea with her characteristic composure, her gray dress and shawl as unassuming as ever. Her knitting bag rested by her chair, a silent companion, but her pale blue eyes were bright, taking in the transformed atmosphere. The unmasking of Julian Moreau and Dr. Harold Vance coupled with the recital's success, had restored harmony to the hall, and Miss Marple felt a quiet satisfaction in having played her part. The recovered Beethoven manuscript, now safely locked in Clara's study, symbolized a victory not just over theft, but over the discord of human failings, envy, obsession, and desperation that had threatened the music school's future. Clara, her silver hair swept into a neat bun, wore a deep green dress that radiated warmth, her face free of the strain that had marked it days earlier. She leaned toward Miss Marple, her voice low and grateful. "Jane, I can't thank you enough," she said, her eyes glistening. "Your clarity saved the recital, the school, and perhaps even our spirits. The funds we raised last night will keep the school open for years, and the pledges are still coming in. You've given us a miracle." Miss Marple smiled, her expression modest but her eyes twinkling. "No miracle, Clara, merely observation. In St. Mary Mead, I've learned that truth, like a well-tuned piano, rings clear when you listen for the false notes. Your recital was always destined to shine. It needed only a little tuning." The dining room was quieter than previous mornings, with Julian and Dr. Vance absent, their fates now in the hands of Inspector Lyle. Julian, charged with criminal mischief for sabotaging the piano, faced a tarnished reputation and likely fines, his envy of Eliza having cost him dearly. Dr. Vance, charged with theft for stealing the manuscript, awaited a more serious reckoning, his scholarly pride a cautionary tale of obsession unchecked. Miss Marple reflected on their confessions, Julian's bitter admission of loosening the string and placing the magnet, Dr. Vance's anguished claim that he sought to save the manuscript for posterity and saw parallels to St. Mary Mead, where petty rivalries and misguided ideals often unraveled under scrutiny. Sophia Langley entered, her chestnut curls neatly pinned, her crimson dress of vibrant contrast to the room's muted elegance. Her face, though still shadowed by remorse, carried a new determination, and Miss Marple noted the way she moved with purpose, serving tea with a steadier hand. Sophia's confession to staging minor incidents, the missing sheet music, the broken metronome, the loosened stage light had been a humbling moment, but Clara's decision to forgive her, guided by Miss Marple's counsel, had given her a path forward. As Sophia approached, she paused by Miss Marple's chair, her voice soft but earnest. "Miss Marple, I owe you so much," she said, her eyes meeting Miss Marple's with sincerity. "You could have exposed me, but you gave me a chance to make things right. I've promised Clara complete transparency, no more schemes, only honest work to support the school. I'll never forget your kindness." Miss Marple patted Sophia's hand, her voice warm. "You've a good heart, my dear, and good intentions, however misguided. The school needs your energy, and I've no doubt you'll guide it well. Just remember, truth is the strongest foundation, even when it's hard to build." Sophia nodded, a small smile breaking through her solemnity, and moved to assist Clara, her steps lighter than they had been in days. Miss Marple watched her, recalling a St. Mary Mead girl who had spread rumors to boost a church bazaar, only to learn that honesty drew greater support. Sophia's redemption, she sensed, would be a lasting note in the school's melody. Eliza Crane, the final performer at the table, sat across from Miss Marple, her auburn hair softly framed by a cream-colored dress, a departure from her usual stark black. Her green eyes, once clouded by fear, shone with a quiet confidence, and her hands, no longer trembling, rested calmly on her teacup. The recital had been her triumph, her flawless Chopin and Mozart performances earning praise that echoed beyond the hall. Miss Marple had learned from Clara that a London patron had offered to sponsor Eliza's next concert tour, a testament to her talent and resilience. As breakfast continued, Eliza caught Miss Marple's eye and rose, approaching with a grace that mirrored her playing. "Miss Marple," she said, her voice steady, "I want to thank you. Knowing Julian's actions were exposed, that I wasn't imagining his malice, gave me the strength to perform last night. I've even forgiven him in a way. He was my teacher once, and perhaps his cruelty pushed me to be better. I'm ready to move forward, to focus on my music. Miss Marple smiled, her heart warmed by Eliza's growth. You've a rare gift, Eliza, not just in music, but in spirit. Forgiveness is a strength, and your future will be all the brighter for it. You played like an angel last night, and I suspect you'll do so for years to come. Eliza blushed, her smile radiant, and returned to her seat, her posture reflecting a newfound ease. Miss Marple reflected on Eliza's confession about tearing Julian's sheet music as a girl, a youthful act of desperation that had haunted her. Her honesty had been the key to her liberation, much like a St. Mary Mead boy who had confessed to stealing apples, only to find redemption in owning his mistake. The breakfast drew to a close, and Clara announced that the recital would be rescheduled as a celebratory encore in a few weeks, allowing the community to revel in the school's secured future. The manuscript, she added, would be authenticated by experts, with plans to share its significance publicly, honoring its history while protecting its place in the family. The guests nodded approvingly, their chatter filled with optimism, and Miss Marple felt the hall's harmony restored, its secrets laid bare like a score played to perfection. As the group dispersed, Miss Marple prepared for her return to St. Mary Mead, her suitcase packed with her practical dresses and favorite shawl. Clara accompanied her to the hall's entrance, where a taxi waited to take her to the station. The sea sparkled beyond the cliffs, its rhythm a reminder of time's steady march, and Miss Marple paused, her eyes drifting to the horizon. Jane, you must visit again, Clara said, embracing her. Wentworth Hall is brighter for your presence. Miss Marple smiled, her voice soft but firm. I'd like that, Clara, and perhaps next time we'll enjoy the music without a mystery to unravel. They laughed, a shared moment of lightness, and Miss Marple stepped into the taxi, her mind already turning to her garden and the familiar rhythms of St. Mary Mead. As the taxi wound through the lanes of Thornby-on-Sea, Miss Marple reflected on the case, the chalk mark, the lavender scent, the tuning wrench, the cloaked figure, and the hidden compartment in Vance's cello case. Each had been a note in a complex melody, revealing the frailties of ambition and envy, but also the strength of truth and forgiveness. She thought of a St. Mary Mead fete where a tampered cake had exposed the villagers' spite, and she saw the same pattern here. Discord, when faced with patience and clarity, gave way to harmony. The train chugged through the rolling hills of Devon, and Miss Marple gazed out at the passing landscape, her knitting needles clicking softly in her lap. The case of the phantom recital was closed, but human nature, she knew, would always compose new melodies, and she would be ready to listen. Her quiet wisdom, a steady hand on the keys of truth.